The night Caleb Rivers pulled a dying woman from a burning luxury car, he had no idea she was Aurora Lane, the billionaire CEO who secretly owned every debt in his life. When he woke to find her in his kitchen wearing nothing but his old work shirt, brewing coffee like she belonged there, she said 5 words that shattered everything. "I own your house, Caleb." But what came next would change both their lives forever. Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain hit like bullets against the windshield of Caleb's 15-year-old pickup truck, each drop exploding in a burst of white against the cracked glass. The wipers groaned in protest, struggling to keep up with the deluge as he squinted through the downpour, trying to make out the dark ribbon of asphalt that wound through the hills outside of town. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the world in harsh, skeletal flashes. Trees bent nearly double by the wind, power lines swaying dangerously, debris scattered across the road like the aftermath of some invisible battle. He shouldn't have been out here. Not in this weather. Not at 11:30 on a Tuesday night when any reasonable person was home, safe and dry. But Caleb Rivers hadn't had the luxury of being reasonable for a long time. Not since the accident 3 years ago that took his wife Sarah and left him alone to raise their daughter Maya. Not since he'd traded his engineering degree for whatever odd jobs would pay the bills and keep food on the table. Tonight's emergency call had come from Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow whose basement was flooding. The job paid $200 cash, enough to cover Maya's school field trip fee and maybe, if he stretched it, a tank of gas. So here he was, driving through what the Weather Service was calling a 100-year storm, because $200 meant Maya wouldn't be the only kid left behind when her class went to the Science Museum. Caleb's hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to hurt, his knuckles white in the dim glow of the dashboard. The truck's heater had given up the ghost somewhere around mile marker 12, and his breath came out in visible puffs despite it being late September. His worn flannel shirt was still damp from the last job, clinging uncomfortably to his shoulders, and his work boots squelched every time he pressed the gas pedal. "Come on, girl," he muttered to the truck, patting the dashboard like it was a spooked horse. "Just get me home. Maya's waiting." Maya. 7 years old, with her mother's dark curls and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She'd been asleep when he left, curled up in her bed with Mr. Whiskers, the threadbare stuffed cat that had been Sarah's when she was little. Mrs. Chen from next door was watching her, probably asleep herself on their lumpy couch by now, but still. The guilt gnawed at him like it always did. Another night away. Another bedtime story missed. Another evening of being both mother and father, and feeling like he was failing at both. The road curved sharply ahead, and Caleb eased off the gas, leaning forward to peer through the rain. The storm seemed to be getting worse, if that was even possible. The wind screamed like a living thing, and somewhere in the distance he heard the crack and crash of a tree giving way. The power was out up here, had been for hours probably, and the darkness beyond his headlights was absolute, oppressive, the kind of dark that made you remember you were just a tiny, fragile thing in a very big, very uncaring universe. That's when he saw it. At first it was just a strange glow through the trees, an orange flicker that didn't belong in all that darkness. Caleb's foot hovered over the brake, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. Fire? Out here? In this rain? He rounded the bend and his heart stopped. A car. No, not just any car. A sleek luxury sedan, the kind that cost more than he'd make in 5 years, was wrapped around a massive oak tree about 50 feet off the road. The entire front end was crumpled like aluminum foil, steam rising from the hood in great billowing clouds. And beneath the wreckage, barely visible in the rain and darkness, flames were beginning to lick upward, small now but growing, fed by whatever was leaking from the engine. "Jesus Christ," Caleb breathed, already yanking the wheel hard to the right. The truck fishtailed on the wet asphalt, tires screaming, but he managed to bring it to a shuddering stop on the shoulder. He threw open the door and was instantly soaked, the rain hitting him like a physical force, driving him backward. But he pushed forward, leaving the truck running, headlights aimed at the wreck. The ground was a nightmare of mud and broken glass and twisted metal. Caleb half ran, half slid down the embankment toward the car, his boots sinking into the saturated earth. The flames were bigger now, angrier, and he could hear a sound that made his blood run cold, a desperate rhythmic pounding from inside the vehicle. Someone was alive in there. "Hold on!" he shouted, though his voice was nearly lost in the howl of the storm. "I'm coming!" As he got closer, he could make out more details through the rain-streaked windows. The car was a Mercedes, top of the line, with leather interior and probably every luxury feature money could buy. The driver's side was completely destroyed, crushed inward by the impact with the tree. But the passenger side, that was still relatively intact. And there, pressed against the window, was a hand. A woman's hand, pale and delicate, fingers splayed against the glass, beating weakly. Below it, barely visible through the spider-webbed window, was a face. Even in the darkness and chaos, even through the distortion of cracked glass and rain, Caleb could see her eyes, wide, terrified, pleading. "The door!" he yelled, grabbing the handle and yanking. It didn't budge. Locked, or more likely jammed from the impact. The flames were spreading now, crawling up from underneath the engine compartment, and he could smell gasoline, strong and acrid even through the rain. They had maybe a minute, maybe less. The woman inside was saying something, her lips moving frantically, but he couldn't hear her over the storm. She was young, 30, maybe 35, with dark hair plastered to her face and blood running from a cut on her forehead. She was wearing what looked like an expensive business suit, now torn and soaked, and one hand was pressed against her side like she was trying to hold something together. "Get back from the window!" Caleb shouted, making a pushing motion with his hands. "Cover your face!" For a second, their eyes met through the glass, and something passed between them, a moment of perfect, terrified understanding. Then she nodded, turning away and curling into herself as best she could in the confined space. Caleb looked around desperately for something, anything to break the window with. His eyes landed on a large rock near the base of the tree, probably thrown there by the impact. He grabbed it, feeling the rough edges cut into his palms, and swung with everything he had. The window exploded inward in a shower of safety glass, the sound lost in the roar of wind and rain. Immediately, smoke began pouring out, thick and black, and he heard the woman cough, a desperate, racking sound that spoke of lungs full of toxic air. "Give me your hand!" Caleb reached through the broken window, ignoring the glass shards that tore at his arms, groping blindly until his fingers found hers. They were cold, so cold, but they gripped his with surprising strength. "I've got you! Come toward me!" She was trying. He could feel her struggling, but something was holding her back. The seatbelt. In her panic or confusion or injury, she hadn't released the seatbelt. "The belt!" he yelled. "You have to unbuckle." "I can't." Her voice was hoarse, barely audible, but he heard the edge of panic in it. "My arm! I can't reach!" No time. The flames were at the dashboard now. He could see them reflected in what was left of the rear-view mirror. Caleb pulled himself halfway through the window, glass grinding into his stomach, his arms, not caring about the pain. His hands found the seatbelt buckle, slick with rain, and something else, blood probably. And he pressed, twisted, pulled. It clicked free. "Now! Move now!" He grabbed her under the arms and pulled, hauling her toward the window with strength he didn't know he had. Strength born of pure desperation and the certain knowledge that they were about to die if he didn't get her out right now, right this second. She screamed as he dragged her through the window, whether from pain or fear or both. He didn't know. Her suit jacket caught on a shard of glass and tore with a sound like fabric giving up. But then she was out, tumbling into his arms, both of them falling backward into the mud, as behind them, the car's interior suddenly erupted in a whoosh of flame. They lay there for maybe 2 seconds, him on his back in the mud with the stranger collapsed on top of him, both of them gasping for air before his survival instincts kicked in. "Up! Get up! It's gonna blow!" Caleb half carried, half dragged her up the embankment, away from the burning wreck. She tried to help, her legs moving mechanically, but she was barely conscious, her weight heavy against his side. They made it maybe 30 feet before the gas tank went up with a sound like the world ending, a massive whomp that sent a ball of orange flame shooting into the stormy sky. The concussive force knocked them both forward, and they hit the ground hard near the truck, mud splashing up around them. Caleb twisted at the last second to take the impact, the woman still clutched against his chest, protecting her with his body even as the air was driven from his lungs. For a long moment, the only sounds were the rain, the crackling of the inferno behind them, and their labored breathing. The heat from the fire was intense even at this distance, turning the rain that hit it into steam. Caleb's ears were ringing from the explosion, and every inch of his body was screaming in protest. But none of that mattered because they were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were alive. "Are you okay?" he managed to gasp out, looking down at the woman in his arms. "Can you hear me? Are you hurt?" Her eyes fluttered open, and in the hellish orange glow of the burning car, he got his first real look at her face. Even covered in mud and blood and rain, even with terror and pain etched into every feature, she was striking. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes that were a startling shade of gray-green. The kind of face you'd see on a magazine cover or a billboard, not crumpled in the wreckage of a car on a forgotten road in the middle of nowhere. "My side," she whispered, and he noticed for the first time that the hand pressed against her ribs was covered in blood. Her blood. A lot of it. "Can't breathe right. Okay, I've got you. We need to get you to a hospital." Caleb tried to pull out his phone, but it was soaked through, the screen black and unresponsive. He looked around wildly, but there was nothing out here. No houses, no lights, no signs of life. Just the storm and the fire and the two of them. "Phone," the woman mumbled. "In my jacket, inside pocket." With shaking hands, Caleb reached into her torn suit jacket and found a phone. Sleek, expensive, and miraculously still working. But when he tried to call 911, there was no signal. Not even a single bar. The storm must have taken out the cell towers. Damn it! He made the decision in a split second. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away in good weather. In this storm, with the roads flooding and debris everywhere, it could be twice that. And she was bleeding, possibly internally, possibly dying right here in his arms. But his house was only 5 minutes away. He had a first aid kit, supplies, heat. He could at least stabilize her, keep her alive until the storm passed and help could arrive. "Can you walk?" he asked, already knowing the answer. She'd passed out again, her body going limp against his. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and when he pressed his fingers to her throat, her pulse was thready and weak. With strength born of sheer necessity, Caleb got to his feet, cradling the unconscious woman in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe adrenaline was making him stronger. He carried her to the truck, managing somehow to get the passenger door open and slide her onto the bench seat. She moaned softly but didn't wake. Caleb ran around to the driver's side, his boots sliding in the mud, and climbed in. The cab smelled like wet wool and blood and fear. He put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road, driving as fast as he dared, which wasn't nearly fast enough. "Stay with me," he said to the woman, glancing over at her every few seconds as if his words alone could keep her tethered to consciousness, to life. "You're going to be okay. I promise. Just stay with me." She didn't respond. Blood was still seeping through her fingers where she clutched her side, staining the torn fabric of her suit, pooling on the cracked vinyl seat. Her head lolled against the window with each bump in the road, and in the brief flashes of lightning, her face looked almost corpse-like, all the color drained away. Caleb pressed harder on the gas pedal, the speedometer creeping up past 50, past 60, the truck shuddering with the effort. Every second felt like an eternity. Every mile stretched into infinity. The rain kept coming, relentless, and the road ahead was a black tunnel that seemed to have no end. Come on," he muttered, not sure if he was talking to the truck, or the woman, or God, or whoever might be listening. "Please." His street finally appeared out of the darkness, and he took the turn too fast, tires squealing, the back end of the truck sliding. But he kept control, pulling up to his small rental house with a spray of gravel and mud. The porch light was on. Mrs. Chen must have left it on for him, and it looked like a beacon, a promise of warmth and safety. Caleb killed the engine and jumped out, running around to the passenger side. The woman was even paler now, if that was possible. Her breathing so shallow he had to press his ear to her chest to confirm she was still breathing at all. "Not today," he growled, lifting her again into his arms. "You don't get to die today. Not after all that." He kicked the front door open. He never locked it, there was nothing inside worth stealing anyway, and carried her straight through the tiny living room to his bedroom. It was the only room with a proper bed. And right now, that was what mattered. He laid her down as gently as he could on the faded quilt, her blood immediately beginning to soak into the fabric. Okay, okay, think. Caleb ran his hands through his wet hair, forcing his panicked mind to slow down, to focus. He'd taken a wilderness first aid course years ago, back when he and Sarah used to go camping. He tried to remember the steps. ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. Her airway was clear, she was breathing, but that circulation part, that was the problem. He grabbed the first aid kit from the bathroom, a pathetic thing with Band-Aids and aspirin and not nearly enough gauze, and then clean towels from the closet. Back in the bedroom, he carefully peeled away the remains of her suit jacket and the silk blouse underneath, trying to respect her modesty even as he needed to see the wound. There, on her left side, just below her ribs, a deep gash, maybe 4 inches long, still bleeding freely, probably from the broken window or twisted metal. It needed stitches, or better yet, a surgeon, but neither of those were options right now. Caleb pressed a towel against the wound, applying as much pressure as he dared. The woman gasped, her eyes flying open, wide and unfocused. "It's okay. You're safe," he said quickly, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was hammering. "You were in an accident. I'm trying to help. This is going to hurt, but I need to stop the bleeding." "Where?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "My house. About 5 miles from where you crashed. The hospital's too far and the roads are bad." "I'm sorry. I know this isn't—" "My briefcase," she interrupted, trying to sit up, panic flooding her eyes. "In the car I need—" Hey, no!" Caleb gently pushed her back down. "You need to stay still. The car's gone. It burned. I'm sorry, but whatever was in there, it's not worth your life." She stared at him for a long moment, something complicated passing across her face. Fear, loss, resignation. Then her eyes rolled back and she passed out again. For the next hour, Caleb worked in a fog of exhaustion and determination. He cleaned the wound as best he could with bottled water and the contents of his first aid kit, packed it with gauze, wrapped her entire midsection in clean towels secured with duct tape because he'd run out of medical tape. It wasn't pretty, but the bleeding was slowing. That was something. He checked her for other injuries, a bump on her head that was probably a concussion, bruising already forming along her ribs and shoulder, but nothing else seemed broken or bleeding. Her pulse was stronger now, her breathing more regular. She was going to make it. Probably. Only after he was sure she was as stable as he could make her did Caleb allow himself to collapse into the chair beside the bed, every muscle in his body suddenly screaming in protest. His arms were covered in cuts from the glass. His clothes were soaked through and muddy, and he was pretty sure he'd bruised at least one rib when he'd fallen with her during the explosion. But she was alive. They were both alive. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain hammering against the windows, wind making the old house creak and groan. But inside, in this small bedroom with its peeling wallpaper and secondhand furniture, there was warmth and light and the simple miracle of breath moving in and out of 2 sets of lungs. Caleb's phone, miraculously functional after drying out a bit, showed it was past 2 in the morning. He should call someone, should try to get help, but the cell signal was still non-existent, and his landline had been disconnected months ago for non-payment. He looked at the woman sleeping in his bed, this beautiful stranger who'd come out of nowhere and almost died in front of him. Her dark hair was spread across his pillow, no longer matted with blood and rain, but still damp. Her face in sleep looked younger, more vulnerable. There was an elegance to her even now, even like this, something in the line of her jaw, the arch of her brows, that spoke of wealth and power and a life so far removed from his own that they might as well be from different planets. Who was she? Where had she been going in such a hurry, in such terrible weather? And what had been in that briefcase that was important enough to be her first thought after almost dying? Questions for later. Right now, she needed rest. They both did. Caleb stood with a groan, every joint protesting, and grabbed a spare blanket from the closet. He draped it carefully over her, tucking it around her shoulders. Then he moved to the chair in the corner, an old recliner with springs that poked through the cushion, and settled into it as best he could. He should change into dry clothes. He should check on Maya, make sure she was still peacefully asleep in her room and that Mrs. Chen was okay on the couch. He should do a lot of things. But exhaustion pulled at him like a physical weight, and his eyes were already closing, his body making the decision for him. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was the steady rise and fall of the woman's chest, proof that his desperate efforts in the rain and fire had meant something, had saved a life. Tomorrow would bring questions, complications, probably a whole lot of trouble he wasn't prepared for. But tonight, in this moment, that was enough. Caleb woke to sunlight streaming through the gaps in the curtains, warm and insistent on his face. For a moment he was disoriented, his body stiff and aching in the uncomfortable chair, his neck twisted at an angle that sent sharp pains down his spine. Then it all came rushing back, the storm, the fire, the woman. His eyes snapped open and he jerked upright, looking immediately at the bed. It was empty. The blanket was thrown back, the sheets stained with dried blood, but the woman was gone. Panic surged through him. Had she left? Wandered off in confusion from the head injury? Was she lying unconscious somewhere in the house? Then he heard it. Sounds from the kitchen. The clink of ceramic, the quiet hiss of water running, the soft pad of footsteps on the worn linoleum. Caleb stood, his legs protesting, and made his way down the short hallway. He could smell coffee, actually smell coffee, which was strange because he'd been out of coffee for a week, couldn't afford to buy more until Friday's paycheck. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and froze. There she was, standing at his ancient coffee maker, wearing nothing but his spare work shirt, a faded blue button-down that hung to mid-thigh on her frame. Her dark hair was damp from what must have been a shower, hanging loose around her shoulders. Her feet were bare on the cracked linoleum. She looked impossibly out of place in his shabby little kitchen with its peeling contact paper on the counters and the cabinet door that hung crooked because he hadn't had time to fix it yet. But she moved with a strange kind of grace, despite the obvious pain in her movements, as if she did this every morning, as if she belonged here. She turned as if sensing his presence, and their eyes met across the small space. In the clear morning light, without the terror and chaos of the night before, he could really see her for the first time. She was beautiful, not in the airbrushed magazine way, but in a way that was real and striking and a little intimidating. Those gray-green eyes were sharp, intelligent, despite the exhaustion and pain that lined her face. The cut on her forehead had stopped bleeding, but it would definitely scar. "Good morning," she said, her voice still hoarse but steadier than it had been last night. She held up a mug of coffee in offering. "I hope you don't mind. I found this in the back of your cupboard." She paused, a slight wry smile touching her lips. "I also hope you don't mind me borrowing your shirt. My clothes were unsalvageable." Caleb just stared at her, his sleep-fogged brain trying to process the surreal scene in front of him. This woman, this stranger who he'd pulled from a burning car less than 8 hours ago, was standing in his kitchen, making coffee, wearing his shirt, looking like some kind of impossible dream. He started, then stopped, not sure what to say. "You shouldn't be up. You need to rest. You were hurt badly. You might have internal injuries, a concussion. I'm a little banged up," she admitted, "but I've felt worse." She walked toward him, slowly, carefully, one hand pressed to her bandaged side, and held out the mug. "Here. You look like you need this more than I do." He took it automatically, the warmth of the ceramic seeping into his cold hands. The coffee smelled good, better than any he'd been able to afford in months. He took a sip and nearly groaned. It was perfect, strong but smooth, exactly the way he liked it. "How did you—" he started, then noticed the shopping bag on the counter, the one from the expensive grocery store across town. "Where did that come from?" "I had it delivered," she said simply, as if having groceries delivered at dawn to a stranger's house was the most normal thing in the world. "Your cupboards were rather bare, and I thought it was the least I could do after you saved my life." "You had groceries delivered." Caleb repeated the words slowly, trying to make sense of them. "At 6 in the morning, in the aftermath of the worst storm in years, to a house you don't know the address of." For the first time, something flickered in her expression, amusement maybe, or appreciation for his skepticism. "I have resources, and I'm very good at solving problems." She moved to the kitchen table, lowering herself carefully into one of the mismatched chairs. "Please sit. We should talk." Caleb remained standing, suddenly very aware of how he must look. Muddy, blood-stained, his clothes torn and filthy from the night before. I should change first. Mr. Rivers, she said quietly, and something in her tone made him look at her sharply. Sit down, please. He sat, more out of surprise than obedience. How do you know my name? Your mail is on the table. She nodded toward the small pile of bills and junk mail he'd been ignoring for days. And I may have looked you up while you were sleeping. I hope you don't mind. Looked me up. On my phone. It survived the crash remarkably well. She pulled the sleek device from the shirt pocket, his shirt pocket, and laid it on the table between them. Caleb Michael Rivers, 35 years old, former mechanical engineer, now working as a handyman, widower, single father to one daughter, Maya, age 7. You live in this rental house on Oak Street, and you're 3 months behind on rent. Each word landed like a small explosion in the quiet kitchen. Caleb's hands tightened around the coffee mug. Who the hell are you? My name, she said, meeting his eyes with that unsettling directness, is Aurora Lane. I'm the CEO of Lane Industries, and I'm the woman whose life you saved last night. The name meant nothing to him at first. Lane Industries. It sounded familiar, the way a lot of corporate names sound familiar when you've seen them on billboards or heard them in commercials, but nothing specific. Then it clicked. Lane Industries, the massive conglomerate that had been buying up property all over the county for the past 2 years. The company that owned half the businesses in town, including the property management firm that rented him this house. Aurora Lane. The billionaire CEO who'd been on the cover of Forbes last year. The woman who'd inherited a fortune at 30 and turned it into an empire by 35. The person who, if the rumors were true, owned more property in this county than anyone except the government itself. Oh, Caleb said faintly. Oh, I see you recognize the name. Aurora took a careful sip of her own coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug. What you probably don't know is that Lane Industries owns the company that owns this house, which means, in a rather indirect but very real way, she paused, and something complicated crossed her face. I own your house, Caleb, and your debt. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Caleb set down the coffee mug very carefully, afraid he might throw it otherwise. You're telling me that the woman I pulled from a burning car, the woman I brought into my home and saved, is my landlord, the person who's about to evict me for not paying rent. I didn't know that when I got in the car last night, Aurora said quickly. I was driving back from a meeting in the city. The weather turned bad and I thought I could outrun it. Obviously, I was wrong. She looked down at her hands, at the fresh bandages wrapped around her wrists where the glass had cut her. And for what it's worth, you're not being evicted. I don't personally manage properties. I have people for that. And I wasn't aware of your situation until I looked you up this morning. Right. You just happen to own everything. The words came out harsher than he intended, but he couldn't help it. The cosmic joke of it all was too much. Of course. Of course the woman he'd saved would turn out to be the person who held power over every aspect of his precarious life. I know how it looks, Aurora said softly. Believe me, I know. The rich CEO swooping in, playing God with people's lives. It's what everyone thinks of people like me, and they're not entirely wrong. She looked up at him, and there was something raw in her eyes, something real. But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth, and because I need you to understand something. What? She stood, moving carefully around the table until she was standing right in front of him, close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used in his shower, see the flecks of gold in her gray-green eyes. Last night, when you pulled me from that car, you had no idea who I was. You saw a person in danger and you risked your life to save mine. You didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate the cost or weigh the benefits. You just helped. Her voice cracked slightly. Do you have any idea how rare that is? In my world, every interaction is a transaction. Every gesture has an angle. I haven't met someone who helped me just because it was the right thing to do, and God, I don't even know how long. Caleb stood too, uncomfortable with her being so close, uncomfortable with the raw emotion in her voice. I'm not special. Anyone would have done the same. No, Aurora said flatly. They wouldn't. Most people would have kept driving. It was a terrible storm, a dangerous situation, and helping me could have gotten you killed. But you stopped anyway. She reached out as if to touch his arm, then seemed to think better of it, her hand dropping back to her side. I owe you my life, Caleb Rivers, and I want to repay that debt. I don't want your money, he said immediately, instinctively. I know. That's what makes you different. A sad smile touched her lips. But I'm going to help you anyway. Call it selfishness if you want. I'll sleep better knowing the man who saved me isn't struggling to keep a roof over his daughter's head. Before he could protest, before he could say anything, the sound of small feet pounding down the hallway made them both turn. Daddy! Maya burst into the kitchen, her dark curls flying, Mr. Whiskers clutched under one arm. She skidded to a stop when she saw Aurora, her eyes going wide. Who are you? She asked with the blunt curiosity of a 7-year-old. Aurora smiled and it transformed her face, softening all those sharp, powerful edges into something warm and genuine. She crouched down slowly, mindful of her injured side until she was at Maya's eye level. My name is Aurora, she said gently. I'm a friend of your daddy's. He helped me out last night when I was in trouble. Maya looked from Aurora to Caleb and back again, processing this. Are you okay now? I am, thanks to him. Aurora's eyes shimmered slightly, and Caleb realized with a start that she was fighting back tears. Your daddy is a hero, Maya. You should be very proud of him. I know, Maya said matter-of-factly, making both adults smile. Then, with the attention span of a child, she turned to Caleb. Is Mrs. Chen still here? Can I have pancakes? Mrs. Chen went home early this morning, sweetie, and... Caleb glanced at the cupboards, knowing exactly how empty they were. I'm not sure we have... I brought pancake mix, Aurora interrupted, standing back up. And eggs, and syrup. Real maple syrup, not the fake stuff. She looked at Caleb, challenge and hope mixed in her expression. What do you say, Mr. Rivers? Let me make your daughter breakfast. It's the very least I can do. Caleb wanted to say no. Every instinct told him to refuse this woman's charity, to maintain the walls he'd built between his struggling life and people like her, people who moved through the world with money and power as their shield against every hardship. But Maya was looking up at him with those hopeful eyes, the same eyes Sarah had, and he could feel his resolve crumbling like sand. Please, Daddy. Maya tugged on his muddy shirt. I'm really hungry. Aurora remained perfectly still, waiting for his answer, but there was something vulnerable in her posture, as if his acceptance meant more than just breakfast, as if she needed this small act of normalcy as much as his daughter needed the food. All right, he said quietly, and watched Maya's face light up. But just breakfast. Then we need to talk about getting you to a hospital, getting your injuries properly checked. Deal. Aurora's smile was small but genuine as she turned toward the stove. She moved carefully, one hand pressed to her bandaged side, but with a determination that suggested she wasn't used to being stopped by physical pain. Or maybe she was just used to hiding it. While Aurora worked at the stove with surprising competence for someone he'd assumed had never cooked a meal in her life, Caleb excused himself to shower and change. The hot water stung the cuts on his arms, turned the bottom of the tub brown with mud and dried blood, but it felt like washing away some of the surreal nature of the last 12 hours. When he looked at himself in the mirror afterward, clean, dressed in his least worn jeans and a flannel shirt Maya had given him for Christmas, he almost looked normal. Almost looked like a man who hadn't pulled a dying billionaire from a burning car and then had her make pancakes in his kitchen. When he returned, the smell of vanilla and butter filled the small house, and Maya was sitting at the table, swinging her legs and chattering away to Aurora about her school and her friends and her upcoming field trip to the Science Museum. Aurora listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at Maya's 7-year-old observations about the world. Daddy says we're going to see real dinosaur bones, Maya was explaining as Caleb entered. Not the fake kind, the real ones that are like 1,000,000 years old. 65 million years, actually, Aurora said with a slight smile. For the dinosaurs, anyway. That's when they went extinct. Daddy says I'm going to be a scientist when I grow up, or maybe an astronaut. I haven't decided yet. Why not both? Aurora set a plate of perfectly golden pancakes in front of Maya, then another in front of the empty chair beside her. The world needs more women in science, in all fields, really. Caleb sat down slowly, looking at the breakfast in front of him. The pancakes were perfect. The syrup was indeed real maple. He could tell by the smell, and there was fresh fruit arranged on the side. It was more food than he'd been able to put on the table in weeks, and shame and gratitude warred in his chest. "This looks amazing," Maya said, already digging in. "You're a really good cooker, Miss Aurora." "Thank you, sweetie." Aurora finally sat down with her own plate, moving gingerly. "Though I have to confess, pancakes are about the extent of my culinary skills. I'm much better at boardrooms than kitchens." "What's a boardroom?" Maya asked around a mouthful of pancake. "Maya Manners," Caleb said automatically, but Aurora waved him off. "A boardroom is where people have important meetings about business," she explained. "It's usually a big room with a long table and lots of very serious people in suits." "That sounds boring." Aurora laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise her as much as it did Caleb. "You know what? Sometimes it really is." They ate in relative quiet after that. The only sounds, the clink of forks on plates, and Maya's occasional observations about everything and nothing. Caleb couldn't help but watch Aurora when she wasn't looking, the way she held herself even in pain, the careful grace of her movements, the intelligence in her eyes as she took in every detail of his home. He wondered what she saw when she looked around this place. Poverty, failure, or something else? When Maya finished eating, she asked to be excused to get ready for school, and Caleb nodded, watching her skip out of the kitchen with more energy than he'd seen in days. Good food did that. He'd forgotten. "She's wonderful," Aurora said softly once Maya was out of earshot. "You've done an incredible job with her." "Sarah did most of that," Caleb said before he could stop himself. "Before the accident. She was the good parent. I'm just trying not to screw it up." "The fact that you worry about screwing it up means you won't." Aurora pushed her half-eaten pancakes away, appetite apparently gone. "Can I ask what happened? To your wife?" Caleb's hands tightened around his coffee mug. He didn't talk about Sarah. Not with anyone. Not even with Mrs. Chen, who'd known them both. But something about Aurora's directness, the way she asked without false sympathy or morbid curiosity, made the words come easier than they should have. "Drunk driver," he said flatly. 3 years ago. She was driving home from her nursing shift at the hospital. Guy ran a red light doing 60 in a 35 zone. She died on impact. He walked away with a broken arm and a suspended license. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Not pity, just acknowledgement of loss. "That's not fair." "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not. But that's life, isn't it? We don't get fair. We just get what we get, and we deal with it." Aurora was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the scarred surface of the table. "After my parents died," she said finally, her voice so low he had to lean in to hear it, "I threw myself into work, building the company, making deals, proving I could do what everyone said I couldn't. I thought if I was successful enough, powerful enough, it would fill that hole. It would make the loss matter less. Did it work? No." She looked up at him, and there was a rawness in her eyes that made his chest ache. "I just got lonelier, more isolated. Everyone wanted something from me, my money, my connections, my name. No one wanted just me, the actual person behind the title." "Is that why you were out driving in a storm?" Caleb asked. "Running from all that?" "Something like that." Aurora stood carefully, gathering the plates. "I had a meeting with investors who wanted to flip some of my properties, buy low from struggling tenants, renovate, jack up the rent. Standard gentrification playbook. I refused, they pushed harder, and I left. Probably too angry to be driving safely." "Wait." Caleb stood too, taking the plates from her hands and setting them back on the table. "You refused? But I thought, you thought I was the kind of CEO who squeezes every penny from people who can barely afford to live?" There was no accusation in her voice, just tired acceptance. "I don't blame you for thinking that. Most people in my position would. Hell, most people in my position do." "But not you?" "I grew up in a house not much bigger than this one," Aurora said quietly. "Before my father's company took off, we lived paycheck to paycheck. I remember being Maya's age and wondering if we'd have to move again because we couldn't afford rent. I remember my mother crying over bills she couldn't pay. She looked around the kitchen, at the peeling linoleum and the crooked cabinet door. I remember all of it, and I swore when I had power I'd never be the person who made others feel that fear. Caleb stared at her, trying to reconcile this vulnerable woman with the billionaire CEO he'd looked up online while she was in the shower. The articles had painted her as brilliant but ruthless, a shark in designer suits who'd built an empire through calculated risk and cold business decisions. They hadn't mentioned this, the person behind the power. Your investors must love that philosophy, he said wryly. They tolerate it because I make them money in other ways. Aurora moved to the window, looking out at the morning sun breaking through the last of the storm clouds. But they're getting impatient. The properties in this county, in this town, they're valuable, prime for development, and I'm standing in the way of millions in potential profit. Why? She turned to face him, and something fierce burned in her eyes. Because I remember what it feels like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of people who see you as a number on a balance sheet instead of a human being. I won't be that person, Caleb. I can't. Before he could respond, Maya came bounding back into the kitchen, backpack on and shoes tied, somewhat crookedly, but she'd done it herself. Ready for school? She announced proudly. Caleb glanced at the clock and cursed under his breath. We're late. Maya, go grab your lunch from the fridge. He stopped, remembering that there was no lunch in the fridge. There hadn't been groceries to pack one. Already done, Aurora said, holding up a small brown bag. I hope turkey and cheese is okay. And I added some apple slices and those little cookies from the bag. Maya's eyes went wide. The good cookies? The chocolate ones? The very same. You're the best, Miss Aurora. Maya grabbed the lunch and headed for the door, then paused. Are you going to be here when I get home? Aurora glanced at Caleb, uncertainty crossing her face for the first time that morning. I'm not sure, sweetie. You should stay, Caleb heard himself say, shocking himself as much as her. At least until we can get you checked out by a doctor. You have a concussion and who knows what other injuries. You shouldn't be alone. It was a flimsy excuse and they both knew it. Aurora Lane probably had a dozen people she could call, a mansion somewhere with staff who could care for her, the best doctors money could buy. But something in her expression softened, and she nodded. If you're sure you don't mind. I'm sure. And surprisingly, he was. After dropping Maya at school, with Aurora waiting in the truck, hood pulled up to hide her distinctive features, Caleb drove them to the local urgent care clinic. It was a small place, understaffed and overwhelmed even on a good day, but it was better than nothing. The doctor who examined Aurora was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who raised her eyebrows at the makeshift bandaging but nodded approvingly at Caleb's work. You did good, she told him while Aurora was getting x-rays. That wound could have killed her if it had kept bleeding, and the way you packed it, kept pressure on it, you probably saved her life. Just lucky, I guess. That wasn't luck. That was skill and quick thinking. She gave him a curious look. You have medical training? Wilderness first aid years ago, and my wife was a nurse. I picked up some things. Well, your wife taught you well. The doctor glanced toward the x-ray room. Your friend is lucky to have you. She's not... Caleb started to say she wasn't his friend. Wasn't anything, really. Just a stranger he'd pulled from a burning car. But that wasn't quite true anymore, was it? Somewhere between the coffee and the pancakes and the raw honesty in his kitchen, something had shifted. Yeah, he said instead. She is. The x-rays came back clean. No broken ribs, no internal bleeding, just severe bruising and the laceration that would need proper stitches. The doctor cleaned and stitched the wound, gave Aurora a prescription for antibiotics and pain medication, and sternly ordered her to rest for at least a week. No strenuous activity, no driving, and for God's sake, someone should be watching you for the next 48 hours in case that concussion gets worse, the doctor said. Do you have someone who can do that? Aurora glanced at Caleb, something like hope in her eyes. I'll watch her, he said, and tried not to think about what he was signing up for. A week with a billionaire CEO in his tiny rental house, trying to keep both her and his daughter fed on his non-existent budget while she recovered from injuries she'd gotten in a crash he'd saved her from. Sure. Simple. On the drive back to his house, Aurora was quiet, staring out the window at the storm damage visible everywhere. Downed trees, flooded streets, debris scattered across yards. Her phone buzzed constantly, but she ignored it, letting it ring and ring until finally she powered it off entirely. People must be worried about you, Caleb said. Your staff, your family, whoever. I have no family, Aurora said flatly. And my staff? She laughed, but it was bitter. My staff will assume I'm in a meeting or working from home. I could disappear for a week and no one would think to look for me as a person. They'd just be worried about their paychecks. That's a hell of a way to live. It's the way I chose to live. She turned to look at him, and the sadness in her eyes was almost unbearable. Or maybe it's the way that was chosen for me. I'm not sure anymore. Back at the house, Caleb helped her inside and settled her on the couch with pillows and blankets. She accepted his fussing with surprising grace, not protesting when he brought her water and the pain medication the doctor had given her. You don't have to do this, she said as he arranged pillows behind her back. I can call someone, get a hotel, be out of your hair. And what would Maya think? Caleb countered. She thinks you're my friend. She'll expect you to be here when she gets home. Besides, you heard the doctor. Someone needs to keep an eye on you. And that someone is you. Apparently. He sat down in the chair across from her, suddenly aware of how small his living room was, how shabby everything looked in the harsh light of day. The couch sagged in the middle, the coffee table had water rings from years of use, and the TV was an ancient box that barely worked. I'm sorry this isn't— Don't! Aurora interrupted. Don't apologize for your home. It's more real than any place I've lived in years. They sat in silence for a while. The only sound, the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the occasional car passing outside. Caleb should get up, should call about work, should do something productive. But he found himself just sitting there, watching this strange woman who'd crashed into his life and somehow made him feel less alone than he had in 3 years. Can I ask you something? Aurora said finally, breaking the quiet. Sure. Last night, when you pulled me from the car, you said something. You said, not today. You don't get to die today. Why? Caleb rubbed his hand over his face, remembering that moment, the desperation and rage he'd felt. I've lost too many people, he said simply, and I'm tired of death winning. Is that what you think? That death wins? Doesn't it? He looked at her directly. It took my wife. It almost took you. It takes everyone eventually. But not last night. Aurora leaned forward, wincing at the pull on her stitches. Last night, you won. Life won. Doesn't that count for something? Before he could answer, her phone, which she'd turned back on, began buzzing urgently. She glanced at the screen and her entire demeanor changed, tension flooding her body. I have to take this, she said, standing up too quickly and immediately swaying. Caleb jumped up to steady her, his hands on her arms. You need to rest. It's my company, my VP. I have to— She pulled away from him and answered the call. Marcus, yes, I'm fine. No, I don't need— What do you mean they're calling an emergency board meeting? Caleb watched her pace. Well, try to pace, though the pain kept stopping her, as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Her face went from pale to flushed with anger, her free hand clenching into a fist. They can't do that without my approval. I'm the majority shareholder. She stopped, listening. How is that possible? Marcus, tell me exactly what they're claiming. The conversation went on for several more minutes, Aurora's voice getting progressively harder, more like the CEO he'd read about online. This was the woman who'd built an empire, who faced down investors and competitors without flinching. But underneath the steel in her voice, he could hear fear. When she finally hung up, she stood very still for a long moment, staring at nothing. What happened? Caleb asked quietly. They're trying to force me out, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The board, the investors I walked out on last night, they're claiming that my personal crisis, the crash, me disappearing, proves I'm unfit to lead. They've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow to vote on my removal as CEO. Can they do that? If they have enough votes, yes. She finally turned to look at him, and the devastation in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. I built that company from the ground up after my parents died. I turned it into something that mattered, that actually helped people, instead of just extracting profit from them. And now they want to take it away and turn it into exactly the kind of soulless corporation I've been fighting against. So fight back, Caleb said. You're Aurora Lane. You don't strike me as someone who gives up easily. You don't understand. If they succeed, if they take control, all those properties I've been protecting, all the people living in them who can't afford higher rent, they'll be the first ones thrown out. Development opportunities, they'll call it. But what they mean is gentrification, displacement, forcing out families who've lived there for generations so they can build luxury condos and upscale shops. People like me, Caleb said, understanding dawning. People like you, she confirmed. And I won't be able to stop them. She swayed again, and this time he caught her before she could fall, guiding her back to the couch despite her protests. You're going to rest, he said firmly, and then you're going to figure out how to fight this. But you can't do either of those things if you collapse from exhaustion and pain. I don't have time to rest. The meeting is tomorrow. Then you have today to come up with a plan. But you're doing it from this couch, and you're going to eat something and take your medication and let yourself heal. Understood? Aurora stared at him, and slowly, incredibly, a small smile tugged at her lips. Has anyone ever told you that you're very bossy for a man who doesn't run a billion-dollar company? Has anyone ever told you that you're terrible at taking care of yourself for someone who's supposed to be a genius? Her laugh was unexpected and bright, cutting through the tension. Fair point. Over the next few hours, Caleb watched Aurora transform his living room into a temporary war room. She made calls, sent emails, reviewed documents on her laptop, which she'd had delivered along with changes of clothes and her own toiletries. He'd tried not to think about how she could make all that happen with just a few phone calls when it took him 3 weeks to get his landlord to fix a leaking pipe. Between calls, he forced her to eat, sandwiches from the groceries she'd had delivered, and drink water and take her medication. She protested every time, but she also didn't fight him too hard, as if some part of her was grateful that someone was taking care of her for once. When it came time to pick up Maya from school, Aurora looked up from her laptop with something like disappointment. You're leaving. I have to get Maya, but I'll be back in 20 minutes. Will you be okay? She nodded, but he could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of being alone even for that short time. On impulse, he grabbed the spare house key from the hook by the door and pressed it into her hand. In case you need to lock up or something happens, he said. I trust you. Aurora looked down at the key in her palm like it was something precious and rare. No one's trusted me with anything real in a very long time, she said softly. Well, I do. So don't burn my house down while I'm gone. Her laugh followed him out the door. Maya was thrilled to find Aurora still there when they got home, and insisted on showing her every drawing she'd made in school, every story she'd written, every little treasure she'd accumulated in her 7 years of life. Aurora listened with patience that seemed genuine, asking questions and making observations that showed she was actually paying attention. Watching them together, Maya chattering away, Aurora smiling despite her pain and stress, Caleb felt something in his chest loosen, a knot he hadn't even known was there. This was what his house had been missing. Not money or nice furniture or fancy food, just life. Warmth. Connection. That evening, after Maya was in bed, Aurora returned to her laptop, her expression growing darker as she read through more messages. It's worse than I thought, she said, rubbing her temples. They've been planning this for months. The crash, me disappearing, it just gave them the excuse they needed. They have the votes. Even some board members I thought were loyal have turned. There has to be something you can do. There is. She closed the laptop with more force than necessary. I can show up at that meeting tomorrow, prove I'm fine, and fight them on every single point. But that means going back to the city, back to that world, and... She stopped, her voice breaking slightly. I don't want to. Why not? Because for the first time in years, I feel like a person instead of a position. Here, in this house, with you and Maya, you don't want anything from me. You don't see dollar signs when you look at me. You just see Me. Caleb sat down beside her on the couch, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight she carried. Is that really so rare? You have no idea. She turned to face him fully. Everyone in my life wants something. My board wants profits. My investors want returns. My employees want job security. Even my friends, the few I have left, want access to my world, my connections. You're the first person in years who's helped me without wanting anything in return. I wanted to save your life. That's not nothing. No, she agreed. But you didn't want my money or my influence or my name. You wanted me to live. Just live. As if my life had value beyond what I could provide or produce. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging between them. Caleb thought about his own life, about the past 3 years of struggling and barely surviving, of feeling like he was constantly failing Maya even as he tried his hardest. He'd felt worthless so many times, defined only by what he couldn't provide, what he couldn't be. Your life does have value, he said finally, beyond all the rest of it. You matter, Aurora, not your money, not your company. You. She looked at him with such raw gratitude that it hurt. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold but her grip firm. Help me, she whispered. Come with me tomorrow, to the meeting. I know it's a lot to ask and you have work and Maya to think about, but I can't do this alone. I can't walk back into that room full of vultures by myself and pretend I'm strong enough to face them down. But with you there, with someone who actually gives a damn about me as a person, maybe I can. You don't need me. I do. Her eyes were fierce now. You saved my life, Caleb. Now help me save the thing I built, the company that's protecting people like you from exactly the kind of predatory development these bastards want to force through. He should say no. He had 3 jobs lined up tomorrow that would pay for groceries, and maybe, finally, let him catch up on the rent. Taking a day off to drive into the city with a woman he'd known for less than 24 hours was insane. But looking at her face, seeing the desperation and hope warring there, he couldn't do it. All right, he said, I'll come. But Maya, I'll arrange for the best childcare money can buy. Someone vetted and trusted who can stay with her here, in her own home, so she's comfortable. And I'll pay you for the day, for the work you're missing. I don't want your money, Caleb said again, firmer this time. Then what do you want? He thought about that, really thought about it. What did he want? Not charity, not pity, but maybe something else. I want you to win, he said finally. I want you to walk into that room and destroy them. Not for me, not for some abstract greater good, but because you deserve to. Because you built something that matters and they want to tear it down for profit. So that's what I want, for you to show them why they're wrong about you. Aurora's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Why are you doing this? Really? Because someone should. Caleb squeezed her hand. Because you're right. You saved my life too, in a way. Not from a burning car, but from feeling like I don't matter. Like I'm just another statistic, another struggling nobody that the world can ignore. You made me feel seen, Aurora. So yeah, I'll stand with you tomorrow. And we'll win. She pulled him into a hug then, careful of her injuries, and he could feel her shaking slightly. Relief and fear and hope all mixed together. He held her, this powerful woman who'd shown him her vulnerability, and thought about how strange life was. How you could pull a stranger from a fire and somehow, in the space of a day, they could become someone you'd fight for. When Maya's small voice came from the hallway, Daddy, I had a bad dream. They pulled apart, both smiling at the interruption. Caleb went to comfort his daughter, lifting her into his arms and carrying her back to bed, telling her stories until she drifted off again. When he returned to the living room, Aurora had fallen asleep on the couch, her laptop still open beside her, her hand still holding the spare key he'd given her. He covered her with a blanket and turned off the lights, leaving only the small lamp in the corner burning. Tomorrow, they would go to war. Tomorrow, they would face down boardrooms and investors and people who saw other humans as nothing more than assets to be leveraged. But tonight, in this small house with its peeling wallpaper and crooked cabinets, there was peace. There was a woman who'd learned she mattered beyond her money. There was a man who'd learned his kindness wasn't worthless. And there was a little girl sleeping peacefully, dreaming of dinosaur bones and the stars. Sometimes, Caleb thought as he settled into his own bed, the universe gives you exactly what you need when you need it most, even if it arrives in a burning car during the worst storm in a generation. The morning arrived too quickly, dragging Caleb from restless sleep into the gray pre-dawn light filtering through his bedroom curtains. He lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet house, remembering that today wasn't just another day of patching leaky faucets and fixing broken appliances. Today, he was going to war alongside a woman he'd known for barely 36 hours, fighting people who moved in circles so far above his world they might as well be from another planet. He found Aurora already awake in the kitchen, dressed in a charcoal suit that must have been in one of the deliveries from yesterday. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her makeup flawless despite the bruise yellowing along her cheekbone. She looked every inch the powerful CEO, except for the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee. "You didn't have to get up this early," she said without turning around, somehow sensing his presence. "The meeting isn't until 10. "Couldn't sleep." Caleb moved to stand beside her, accepting the mug she handed him. "You?" "Haven't slept much in years. Last night was actually better than usual." She smiled wryly. "Your couch is surprisingly comfortable for something held together with duct tape and prayers." "That's offensive to the duct tape. It's doing most of the work." Her laugh was soft, nervous. In the strengthening light, he could see the fear she was trying to hide beneath the armor of her expensive suit and perfect composure. This woman who faced down investors and ran a billion-dollar empire was terrified, and somehow that made her more human than anything else could have. "Aurora," he said quietly, "you're going to be fine. You're going to walk in there and remind them exactly who built that company." "What if I can't?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "What if they're right? What if I'm not strong enough to lead anymore, not ruthless enough, too soft for this world?" "Then they're idiots." Caleb set down his mug and turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You're not soft. You're human. There's a difference. And if they can't see that humanity makes you stronger, not weaker, then they don't deserve you." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there seemed to steady her, because she straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Let's do this." The doorbell rang at 7 sharp, and Aurora answered it to reveal a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile. Her name was Patricia, and she came with references that read like a resume for a Secret Service agent. She would stay with Maya, take her to school, pick her up, make sure she was fed and safe and happy. Maya took to Patricia immediately, especially when the woman produced a bag full of art supplies and promised they'd make a project together after school. Caleb knelt down to his daughter's level, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "You be good for Miss Patricia, okay? I'll be back tonight." "Are you going to help Miss Aurora with her important meeting?" Maya asked, her small face serious. "Yeah, baby, I am." "Good." Maya threw her arms around his neck, squeezing tight. "She needs you, Daddy. I can tell." The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze him. He kissed the top of her head and stood, catching Aurora's eye. She was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between longing and sadness and hope. The drive into the city took 90 minutes, the landscape gradually shifting from rural roads and small towns to highways and suburbs, and finally the towering glass and steel of the downtown core. Aurora's company headquarters was in one of the tallest buildings, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces that seemed designed to intimidate. Caleb had never felt more out of place in his life as he climbed out of Aurora's town car. She'd insisted they couldn't show up in his ancient pickup truck, and stared up at the monolith of corporate power. "Second thoughts?" Aurora asked, coming to stand beside him. Despite the confident set of her shoulders, he could see the white-knuckle grip she had on her briefcase. Too late for that. He offered her his arm, surprising himself. "Shall we?" She took it without hesitation, and together they walked through the revolving doors into a lobby that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Everything was marble and chrome and glass, with water features that probably cost more than his house and abstract art that he suspected was supposed to mean something profound. People stared as they passed. Caleb could feel their eyes tracking Aurora, tracking him, speculation written across every face. He heard whispered conversations cutting off as they approached, saw phones being pulled out to snap photos. By the time they reached the elevator, he knew their appearance together would be all over social media. "They're going to tear you apart for bringing me," he said quietly, as the elevator doors closed, sealing them in with their reflection in the polished walls. He looked ridiculous next to her, his best dress shirt and slacks that he'd bought from a discount store 5 years ago suddenly seeming shabby and wrong. "Let them." Aurora's jaw was set, her eyes hard. "I'm done apologizing for being human, for having relationships with people who aren't billionaires or investors or part of their approved social circle." The elevator climbed with stomach-dropping speed, the numbers ticking higher and higher until finally stopping at the 47th floor. "The boardroom," Aurora had told him, "where empires were built and destroyed, where millions of dollars changed hands, based on nothing more than confidence and perception and the ability to convince people you were worth betting on." The doors opened onto a scene of controlled chaos. Men and women in expensive suits rushed past carrying tablets and phones, their conversations urgent and clipped. A young man with wire-rimmed glasses approached immediately, his expression a mixture of relief and panic. "Ms. Lane, thank God. We weren't sure you'd make it. There are rumors that you were seriously injured, that you're incapacitated, that—" His eyes landed on Caleb and widened slightly. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met." "Marcus, this is Caleb Rivers," Aurora said calmly. "He's with me today." "Caleb, this is Marcus Chen, my VP of Operations and the only person in this building I actually trust." Marcus looked between them, clearly trying to puzzle out what role Caleb played in coming up empty. "Ms. Lane, the board is already assembled. They're waiting, and I have to warn you, the votes don't look good. Davidson and Moreau have been working the other members hard, promising returns and painting you as unstable, emotionally compromised." "I'm aware of what they've been doing." Aurora's voice was ice. "Are the press here?" "In the gallery. You said you wanted this public." "I did. I do." She turned to Caleb, and for just a moment the mask slipped and he saw her fear again. "Last chance to walk away. Once we go in there, you're going to be part of this. They'll come after you too, dig into your life, use you against me if they can." Caleb thought about his life, about the past 3 years of struggling and failing and barely holding on, about Maya and the future he was trying to build for her, about the fact that standing here, in this temple of wealth and power, he should feel small and insignificant. But he didn't, because Aurora Lane, for all her billions and her empire, had looked at him and seen someone worth trusting, worth fighting alongside, and that was worth more than any amount of money. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Let's go show them what a mistake they made." The boardroom was even more intimidating than he'd imagined. A massive oval table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than his truck. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city spread out below like a kingdom, and on the far wall a screen displayed the Lane Industries logo in subtle gold. Around the table sat 15 people, all dressed in the uniform of corporate power, all wearing expressions that ranged from hostile to calculatingly neutral. At the far end, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes stood as they entered. "Aurora," he said, his voice carrying false warmth. "We were concerned when we didn't hear from you after your accident. I'm glad to see you're well enough to attend." "Cut the bullshit, Davidson." Aurora strode to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the CEO, and remained standing. "You called this meeting to force me out, so let's not pretend this is about concern for my well-being." Davidson's smile widened and Caleb felt his skin crawl. This was a shark, he realized, a predator who'd been circling, waiting for any sign of weakness. "Very well, since you prefer directness." Davidson pressed a button and the screen behind him lit up with a presentation. "The board has concerns about your recent decisions, your refusal to develop key properties that could generate billions in revenue, your rejection of the Morrison deal that would have expanded our portfolio significantly, your tendency to let personal feelings override sound business judgment. My tendency to remember that we're dealing with human beings, not just assets on a spreadsheet," Aurora corrected, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Semantics." A woman to Davidson's left, Moreau, Caleb assumed, leaned forward. The fact is, Aurora, your leadership has cost this company opportunities. And now, with this accident, disappearing for 2 days without communication, bringing, she glanced at Caleb with barely concealed disdain, outsiders into company business. It demonstrates instability. I was injured in a car crash and recovering, Aurora said coldly. Unless you'd prefer I died in that wreck, I'm not sure what you expected me to do differently. We expected you to put the company first, Davidson said, to maintain communication with your board, to demonstrate that you're capable of handling the responsibilities of leadership even in crisis. Instead, you vanished, and when you finally surface, it's with, he gestured vaguely at Caleb, this person. Caleb felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. He started to step forward, to say something, anything to defend Aurora, but her hand shot out and gripped his wrist, holding him back. This person, Aurora said, each word precisely enunciated, is Caleb Rivers. He's the man who saved my life when my car crashed and caught fire, who pulled me from the wreckage seconds before it exploded, who provided first aid that kept me alive until I could reach a hospital. So yes, Davidson, I brought him here, because unlike any of you, he actually gives a damn whether I live or die beyond what my death would mean for stock prices. The room went very quiet. Someone coughed uncomfortably. Davidson's expression flickered just for a second, uncertainty crossing his face. Be that as it may, Moreau recovered first, heroics don't qualify someone to observe board proceedings. This meeting should be private. This meeting, Aurora said, pressing another button on the table, is being live-streamed to every major financial news outlet and social media platform as we speak. You wanted to question my fitness to lead? Fine. Let's do it publicly. Let's let everyone see exactly what you're trying to do here. The reaction was immediate. Half the board members looked panicked, the other half furious. Davidson's face went red, then white. You can't do that, he sputtered. This is a private board meeting. There are confidentiality agreements, which I, as CEO and majority shareholder, have the authority to waive in matters of significant public interest. And I'd say an attempted coup of a Fortune 500 company qualifies, wouldn't you? Aurora smiled, and it was terrifying. So please, continue. Tell everyone watching why you think I'm unfit to lead the company I built from the ground up after my parents died. Tell them how my refusal to displace working families for luxury developments makes me a bad CEO. Tell them how saving my life makes Caleb unworthy of being here. This is absurd, Moreau hissed. You're proving our point. This is emotional, irrational. No! Aurora's voice cracked like a whip. What's irrational is a system that values profit over people so completely that basic human decency is seen as weakness. What's absurd is that I have to justify caring about the lives my company affects. What's emotional is you, Davidson, so desperate to line your pockets with development money that you're willing to destroy everything my parents built just to add a few zeros to your net worth. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Papers scattered across the polished surface, and Caleb could see they were covered in numbers, charts, highlighted sections. These are the financial projections you've been hiding from me. The ones showing exactly how much you and your allies stand to personally gain from the Morrison deal and the property development schemes. Millions in kickbacks and consulting fees, all dressed up as legitimate business expenses. Aurora's eyes were fierce, burning with righteous anger. You're not trying to remove me because I'm a bad CEO. You're trying to remove me because I won't let you loot this company. The room erupted. Board members were shouting, some at Aurora, some at Davidson and Moreau, some at each other. Davidson was on his feet, face purple with rage, demanding to know how she got those documents. Moreau was frantically typing on her phone, probably calling her lawyer. And through it all, Aurora stood like a pillar of stone, unshakable. Marcus appeared at Caleb's elbow, leaning in close. She's been planning this for weeks, he whispered, gathering evidence, building her case. The crash just accelerated the timeline. They thought she was weak, vulnerable. They have no idea what they're dealing with. Caleb watched Aurora command the room, her voice cutting through the chaos, and thought about the woman who'd stood in his kitchen making pancakes, who'd hugged him and admitted her fears. This was the same person, he realized. The strength and the vulnerability weren't contradictions. They were two sides of the same coin, and together they made her something extraordinary. Enough! Aurora's shout silenced the room. You called this meeting to vote me out, so let's vote. But know this, if you remove me, every piece of evidence I have about your corruption goes to the SEC and every major news outlet in the country. Your careers will be over, your reputations will be destroyed, and the company my parents built will survive because I've already arranged for my shares to be placed in a trust that will ensure their vision continues with or without me. You're bluffing, Davidson said, but his voice lacked conviction. Try me. Aurora leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. I have nothing left to lose. You took my parents. You've tried to take my company. You've painted me as unstable and emotional and weak, but I'm still standing, and I'm done playing by rules that were designed to let people like you exploit people like the families living in the properties you want to demolish. She straightened, and her eyes swept across every face in the room. So vote, right now, publicly, on camera, and let's see how many of you are willing to align yourselves with corruption when the whole world is watching. The silence that followed was deafening. Board members looked at each other, at the camera feeding their meeting to thousands of viewers, at the documents spread across the table proving Davidson and Moreau's schemes. The calculus was happening in real time, weighing loyalty against self-preservation, greed against consequence. Finally, one of the older board members, a woman named Chen, who Caleb vaguely remembered Aurora mentioning as a friend of her mother's, stood up. I move that this attempt to remove Aurora Lane as CEO be withdrawn, she said clearly. And I further move that we open an immediate investigation into the financial dealings outlined in these documents. I second that motion, another voice said, then another. The tide was turning. Caleb could see it in Davidson's eyes, the moment he realized he'd lost. The man who'd been so confident, so certain of his victory, was watching his carefully constructed coup collapse in real time. This isn't over, Davidson growled, grabbing his things. You may have won today, Aurora, but you've made enemies, powerful enemies. I've had powerful enemies since I was 23 years old and inherited this company, Aurora said calmly. What's a few more? Davidson and Moreau left, followed by two other board members who'd clearly been part of their scheme. The remaining board voted unanimously to retain Aurora as CEO and to launch a full investigation into the corruption she'd exposed. When it was finally over, when the live stream was ended and the remaining board members had filed out with expressions ranging from apologetic to relieved, Aurora finally allowed herself to collapse into her chair. The transformation was instantaneous, all the steel and fire draining out of her, leaving behind exhaustion and pain and the very human aftermath of surviving a battle. Caleb was at her side immediately, kneeling beside her chair. Hey, you okay? I think I'm going to throw up, she admitted, her voice shaking. Oh God, Caleb, did I really just do that? Did I just live stream a board meeting and accuse half my board of corruption on camera? You did. And it was incredible. He took her hand, finding it ice cold. You won, Aurora. You saved your company. We won, she corrected, looking at him with eyes that were suddenly bright with tears. I couldn't have done that without you here. Just knowing you were in the room, that someone was on my side not because of what they could gain, but because they actually cared. It made all the difference. Marcus reappeared, his phone pressed to his ear. Ms. Lane, you need to see this. The response online is overwhelming. You're trending worldwide. People are calling you a hero, saying you're the kind of CEO the business world needs. The stock price is up 15% and climbing. Aurora laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. Of course it is. Because that's all that matters in the end, isn't it? The stock price. No, Caleb said firmly, drawing her attention back to him. What matters is that you stood up for what was right, that you protected people who couldn't protect themselves. That you proved being human doesn't make you weak. It makes you the kind of leader people want to follow. She stared at him for a long moment, then pulled him into a fierce hug, burying her face against his shoulder. He could feel her shaking, the adrenaline and fear and relief all pouring out at once. He held her, not caring that they were in her boardroom, that Marcus was tactfully looking away, that they barely knew each other. In that moment, it didn't matter. She needed someone to hold her together, and he could do that. He would do that. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. Thank you for being here, for believing in me. Always, he said, and meant it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. There were meetings with lawyers, statements to prepare, calls from reporters that Marcus fielded with practiced efficiency. Aurora moved through it all with renewed energy, the crisis that could have destroyed her instead becoming fuel for her fire. She announced the formation of the Rivers Initiative during an impromptu press conference, naming it after Caleb despite his protests, dedicating it to protecting vulnerable communities from predatory development practices. "This isn't charity," she told the assembled reporters, her voice strong and clear. "This is good business. Sustainable communities, stable housing, people who can afford to live and work and raise families, that's the foundation of a healthy economy. And it's time corporations remembered that." Watching her speak, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Pride, yes, but also something deeper. Something that scared him because it felt too big, too fast, too impossible. This woman, with her billions and her empire and her fierce determination to make the world better, had crashed into his life and changed everything. She'd made him feel seen, valued, important. She'd taken his simple act of kindness and turned it into something that might actually change lives. They didn't leave the city until after 7, both of them exhausted and emotionally drained. The ride back was quiet, Aurora's head resting against the window, her hand somehow finding his in the space between their seats. "I need to tell you something," she said as they neared his town. "About the house." Caleb's stomach clenched. Here it comes, he thought, the other shoe dropping. "What about it?" "I meant what I said before, about not being involved in day-to-day property management, but I looked into your situation specifically after I found out." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "You're 3 months behind on rent because your hours were cut at 2 of your regular jobs, and Maya needed new school supplies and clothes. You've been skipping meals to make sure she has enough to eat. You're one emergency away from eviction." "I'm aware," Caleb said stiffly, hating that she knew, hating the pity he expected to see in her eyes. But there was no pity, just determination. "I'm transferring ownership of the house to you," Aurora said. "Free and clear. No mortgage, no rent, nothing. It's yours." Caleb jerked his hand away from hers. "Absolutely not." "Caleb, no. I told you I don't want your charity. I don't want to be your pet project or your guilty conscience or whatever this is." He could hear the anger in his voice, the fear beneath it. "I'll figure it out on my own. I always do." "This isn't charity," Aurora said, her voice rising to match his. "And it's not guilt. It's gratitude, yes, but it's also practical. You saved my life, which saved my company, which saved thousands of jobs and protected hundreds of families from displacement. The economic impact of what you did by pulling me from that car is worth tens of millions of dollars. So a house, one house, is actually a pretty reasonable compensation. You're trying to put a price on basic human decency. No, I'm trying to make sure that basic human decency doesn't bankrupt you." She took a breath, clearly trying to calm herself. "Caleb, please, let me do this. Not because you need saving, but because you deserve stability. Because Maya deserves a home that can't be taken away. Because I can do this, and it costs me almost nothing while it means everything to you." "And what do I owe you in return?" The question came out harsher than he intended. "What strings are attached to this gift?" Aurora looked at him like he'd slapped her. "Nothing. No strings. No expectations. Just, let me help you the way you helped me. Please." They stared at each other in the dim interior of the car, the lights of passing street lamps creating a strobe effect across their faces. Caleb wanted to refuse. His pride demanded it, but he thought about Maya, about the fear he lived with every day that they'd lose their home, that he'd fail to provide the one thing every child needed: security. "I need to think about it," he said finally, a compromise that satisfied no one. Aurora nodded slowly. "Okay, take all the time you need." The car pulled up to his house, and they both sat there for a moment, neither moving to get out. The day had been too long, too intense, too full of revelations and battles and emotions that neither of them were quite prepared to process. "You did something extraordinary today," Caleb said quietly. "You know that, right? You didn't just save your company, you set a precedent. You showed people that there's another way to do business." I was terrified the entire time, Aurora admitted. When I stood up in that boardroom, I kept thinking about what you said this morning, about destroying them. And I realized I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to be better than them, to prove that power doesn't have to corrupt, that success doesn't require sacrificing your humanity. I think you proved that today. She smiled, small and genuine. We proved it, together. They got out of the car and walked to the front door together, the night air cool against their faces. Patricia met them with a good report. Maya had been perfect. They'd made a beautiful art project. She'd eaten all her dinner and was now sleeping peacefully. After Patricia left, Aurora stood in the living room looking suddenly lost, as if she wasn't sure what came next. Caleb knew the feeling. Everything had changed in the span of a few days, and neither of them knew quite how to navigate this new reality they'd created together. You should rest, he said. It's been a hell of a day. I don't want to rest. Aurora moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street. I don't want to go back to my empty penthouse where no one cares if I'm alive or dead, as long as the quarterly reports look good. I don't want to pretend that today didn't change everything. Oh, what do you want? She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw the same confusion and fear and hope that he felt. I want to stay here, in this house with its broken cabinets and duct-taped couch. I want to wake up and make coffee and hear Maya laughing. I want to feel like a person instead of a corporation. Her voice cracked. I want to matter to someone beyond what I can provide for them. Caleb crossed the room before he could stop himself, before he could think about all the reasons this was complicated and messy, and probably a terrible idea. He took her hands in his, feeling them trembling. You matter, he said firmly. To me. To Maya. Not because of your money, or your company, or any of that. Because of who you are. The woman who makes pancakes and listens to 7-year-olds talk about dinosaurs and fights for people she's never met because it's the right thing to do. Caleb, she whispered, his name a question and a plea and a hope all at once. Stay, he said. As long as you want, as long as you need. This house, as shabby as it is yours too now. Because you're not just someone I pulled from a burning car anymore, you're... He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence, unsure what she was to him beyond all the obvious things. I'm what? She prompted softly. You're someone I want to know, he said finally. Really know. Beyond the crisis and the drama and the life-saving. I want to know what makes you laugh and what keeps you up at night and what you dream about when you let yourself dream. Aurora's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Her laugh was watery but real. Probably. My dating history is a series of disasters featuring men who wanted my money or my name or both. I don't want either of those things. I know, that's why this terrifies me. She squeezed his hands. I don't know how to do this, Caleb. Normal relationships, genuine connection, it's not something I'm good at. I'll probably mess it up. He kissed her. It was impulsive and probably too fast and definitely complicated, but it felt right. Her lips were soft against his, tasting faintly of the coffee they'd drunk hours ago, and for a moment the whole world narrowed down to just this. Two people finding something real in the middle of chaos. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Aurora looked stunned. Oh, she said softly. Oh. Too much? Caleb asked, suddenly worried he'd crossed a line. Not enough, she replied, and kissed him again. They stood there in his shabby living room, holding each other like lifelines, while outside the world kept turning, and tomorrow waited with all its complications and questions. But for now, in this moment, there was just warmth and connection and the simple miracle of two people finding each other against all odds. When they finally pulled apart again, Aurora rested her forehead against his, both of them smiling like idiots. I should probably sleep in the guest room, she said reluctantly. Maya might have questions if... Agreed, definitely the guest room. This is complicated. Extremely. We barely know each other. We've been through more in 3 days than most people experience in years. Aurora laughed softly. Fair point. She pulled back just enough to look at him properly. Thank you, Caleb. For today. For everything. for making me believe that I could be both strong and human. Thank you for crashing into my life, he said, then winced. That sounded better in my head. It was perfect. She kissed him once more, soft and sweet and full of promise. Good night, Caleb Rivers. Good night, Aurora Lane. He watched her climb the stairs to the guest room, her hand trailing along the banister, and thought about how 3 days ago his biggest worry was making rent and keeping Maya fed. Now he was standing in his living room having kissed a billionaire CEO who'd told him he mattered, who'd made him feel like maybe, just maybe, his life could be about more than just surviving. Tomorrow would bring more complications. The media attention, the questions about their relationship, the reality of navigating a connection between two people from such vastly different worlds. But tonight, as he checked on Maya sleeping peacefully in her bed and then settled into his own, Caleb let himself hope. Hope that kindness could be rewarded. Hope that love could grow from the strangest beginnings. Hope that sometimes the universe really did give you exactly what you needed, even if it arrived in a burning car during the worst storm in a generation. Morning came with the sound of Maya's laughter drifting up from the kitchen, followed by Aurora's voice saying something that made his daughter giggle even harder. Caleb lay in bed for a moment, listening to the domestic symphony of his two favorite people in the world, bonding over what sounded like breakfast preparations, and felt his chest constrict with an emotion too big to name. When he finally made his way downstairs, still in his worn sleep pants and faded t-shirt, he found them both at the stove. Aurora was teaching Maya how to flip pancakes, her hands guiding his daughter's smaller ones on the spatula handle, both of them wearing matching expressions of concentration. Watch the bubbles, Aurora was saying. When they pop and don't fill back in, that's when you know it's ready to flip. See? I see it. Can I do it now? Go ahead. Quick flip of the wrist, just like perfect. Maya, that was perfect. They high-fived, and Caleb felt something in his heart crack open. Sarah should be here, he thought with a familiar pang of grief. She should be the one teaching Maya to cook, passing down recipes and kitchen wisdom. But life had taken that from both of them, and somehow, impossibly, this woman who'd crashed into their lives was filling a space he hadn't even realized was still so painfully empty. Daddy! Maya spotted him and waved the spatula, sending a small arc of batter across the counter. I'm making pancakes. Miss Aurora is teaching me. I can see that, baby. Those look amazing. He moved into the kitchen, accepting the coffee Aurora poured for him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The touch sent electricity up his arm, and from the flush that crept up her neck, she felt it too. Did you sleep well? She asked, her voice careful, professional, as if they hadn't spent half of last night kissing in his living room. Better than I have in years, he admitted, letting his eyes convey what he couldn't say in front of Maya. You? The same. Her smile was small and private and just for him. They ate breakfast together like a family, Maya chattering about school and her upcoming field trip, Aurora listening with genuine interest and asking questions that showed she actually cared about the answers. Caleb watched them interact and thought about how quickly his life had transformed. Less than a week ago, he'd been alone in his struggles, convinced that this was just how life would be forever, barely scraping by, loving his daughter fiercely, but feeling like he was failing her in every material way that mattered. Now there was this woman sitting at his table, wearing yesterday's expensive suit with her hair loose around her shoulders, laughing at his 7-year-old's jokes like she'd been part of their lives forever. It should have felt wrong, too fast, too improbable. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The peaceful morning was shattered by a knock at the door, sharp and insistent. Caleb opened it to find a man in his 30s with perfectly styled hair and a camera crew behind him, microphones at the ready. Mr. Rivers, I'm Josh Hendricks from Channel 7 News. We'd love to get your perspective on your relationship with Aurora Lane in yesterday's dramatic board meeting. Can you comment on... Caleb closed the door in his face. Through the wood, he could hear the reporter still talking, the sound of more vehicles pulling up outside. They found us, Aurora said from behind him, her voice resigned. She'd moved Maya behind her protectively, one hand on his daughter's shoulder. I should have known they would. Your address was probably in some database I accessed, and once they connected you to me, there are more of them coming, Maya said, peering out the window. Daddy, why are all those people here? They want to talk to Miss Aurora, baby, about her work. Caleb moved to the window and cursed under his breath. There were at least 5 news vans now, reporters setting up on his lawn, neighbors coming out onto their porches to see what the commotion was about. His phone started buzzing incessantly, calls from numbers he didn't recognize, text messages from people he hadn't talked to in years, suddenly very interested in his life. "I'm sorry," Aurora said, and she sounded genuinely devastated. "Caleb, I'm so sorry. I should have thought about this, should have prepared you for... It's not your fault." He pulled the curtains closed, blocking out the circus on his lawn. "Though we should probably figure out a plan here. I need to get Maya to school, and I have jobs scheduled. I can handle this," Aurora said, already pulling out her phone. "I'll have my security team clear them out, get a perimeter established, and I'll make a statement, draw their attention away from you and Maya." "This is your house too," Caleb said, more sharply than he intended. "I'm not letting you face that alone." She looked up at him, surprise and something like gratitude flooding her features. "You don't have to..." "Yeah, I do." He turned to Maya, kneeling down to her level. "Hey baby, how would you like to have an adventure today? Miss Patricia is going to come pick you up and take you to school, and maybe afterward you two can go to that ice cream place you like." "Because of all the people outside?" Maya asked, with a child's uncanny ability to cut through adult complications. "Yeah, because of all the people outside. They're going to want to talk to Daddy and Miss Aurora about grown-up stuff, and it'll be really boring for you." "Okay." Maya hugged him tight, then surprised them both by hugging Aurora too. "Don't let them be mean to you, Miss Aurora. You're nice, and they should know that." Aurora's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she hugged Maya back. "Thank you, sweetie. That means more than you know." Patricia arrived through the back door. Apparently she'd parked in the alley to avoid the media circus, and spirited Maya away with promises of ice cream and a trip to the park. Once they were gone, Caleb and Aurora stood in the sudden quiet of the house, the muffled sound of reporters outside a constant reminder of the reality they now faced. "I can leave," Aurora said quietly. "Pack up my things, have my driver take me back to the city, let you go back to your normal life." "Is that what you want?" "No." The word came out fierce, certain. "But I don't want to destroy your life either. Those reporters out there, they're going to dig into everything. Your finances, your past, Sarah's death, every mistake you've ever made. They'll twist it, sensationalize it, turn you into a character in a story instead of a real person. They'll do that to you too. I'm used to it. You're not." She moved to the window, peeking out through a gap in the curtains. "This is my world, Caleb. The scrutiny, the invasion of privacy, the constant performance. I've lived with it for so long I forget how abnormal it is. But you and Maya, you deserve better than this." Caleb came up behind her, gently turning her away from the window. "What we deserve is to make our own choices, not have them dictated by reporters or what people think or fear of what might happen." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "I'm not going to pretend this isn't complicated. It is. But I'm also not going to run away from something real just because it's difficult." "Something real," she repeated softly. "Is that what this is?" "You tell me. Does it feel real to you?" Aurora's hands came up to cover his, holding them against her face. "It feels like the first real thing I've had in my entire adult life. It terrifies me." "Good. I'd be worried if you weren't scared. I'm terrified." He smiled wryly. "But I've been scared every day for the past 3 years, and I've kept going. This is just a different kind of fear. The kind with reporters camped on your lawn and people judging every aspect of your relationship. The kind where something actually matters enough to fight for it." They stood there for a long moment, forehead to forehead, breathing each other's air, drawing strength from proximity. Then Aurora straightened, and Caleb could see the CEO returning, the steel spine reasserting itself. "Okay," she said, "then let's fight, but we do it smart. We control the narrative instead of letting them control it." What followed was a masterclass in media management. Aurora made calls, mobilizing her PR team, her lawyers, her security. Within an hour, professional security personnel had established a perimeter around Caleb's property, keeping the reporters at a respectful distance. A statement was prepared, carefully worded to acknowledge their relationship while maintaining boundaries around their privacy. We're going to do one interview, Aurora explained as they reviewed the strategy her team had put together. One sit-down with a reputable journalist, tell our story on our terms, and then we shut it down. No more comments, no more access. Let them speculate all they want, but we don't feed the machine beyond this. Our story, Caleb repeated. What is our story exactly? Aurora looked at him, and in her eyes he saw vulnerability mixed with hope. That's up to us to decide. What do you want it to be? He thought about that, really thought about it. A week ago, his story had been simple. Widowed father struggling to survive, one emergency away from disaster, doing his best and feeling like it would never be enough. Now his story was tangled up with hers in ways he couldn't have imagined. But underneath all the complexity, the core of it was simple. The truth, he said finally, that we met by chance in the worst circumstances. That you're not some cold corporate villain and I'm not some gold-digging opportunist. That we're two people who found something unexpected and are trying to figure out if it can become something lasting. That's a good story, Aurora said softly. Honest, real. It's our story. Might as well own it. The interview was scheduled for that evening at Aurora's penthouse in the city. They spent the afternoon preparing, Aurora coaching Caleb on how to handle loaded questions, how to deflect without seeming evasive, how to present himself authentically while still maintaining some privacy. They're going to try to paint you as either a hero or opportunist, she warned. Either the noble working-class guy who saved the billionaire out of pure altruism, or the scheming single dad who saw a meal ticket and seized it. Don't let them box you into either narrative. What if I'm neither of those things? You're not. You're complicated and human, and that's exactly what we need to show them. That we're both just people trying to navigate something unexpected. The drive to the city was tense, both of them mentally rehearsing their talking points, knowing that this interview would set the tone for how the public perceived their relationship. The penthouse, when they finally arrived, was everything Caleb expected and somehow still shocking in its opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the entire city skyline. Modern art worth more than his house decorated the walls, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. "This is where you live?" he asked, taking in the sterile perfection of it all. "This is where I sleep sometimes," Aurora corrected, her voice flat. "I wouldn't call it living." The journalist who arrived was a woman in her 50s named Catherine Morris, known for her thoughtful interviews and lack of sensationalism. She set up in Aurora's living room with a small crew, keeping the production minimal and intimate. "I appreciate you both agreeing to this," Catherine said as they got settled on the couch. "I know this week has been intense for you." "That's an understatement," Aurora said with a slight smile. The interview started with the basics: how they met, what happened during the crash, Caleb's decision to pull Aurora from the burning car. Catherine asked intelligent questions, giving them space to tell the story properly, instead of reducing it to sound bites. "Mr. Rivers, you've been described in various articles this week as everything from a hero to an opportunist," Catherine said. "How do you respond to that?" Caleb took a breath, remembering Aurora's coaching. "I respond by saying that I'm neither. I'm a father trying to provide for my daughter and a man who saw someone in danger and helped. That's not heroism, that's just being human. As for the opportunist angle, I've turned down every offer of money Aurora's made since I pulled her from that car. This isn't about money. It never was." "But you're accepting her help now with housing, correct?" He felt Aurora tense beside him, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm considering accepting a gift that would provide stability for my daughter. There's a difference between accepting help when it's offered out of genuine care and seeking someone out because of what they can give you." "And the nature of your relationship?" "There are rumors that this has become romantic." Caleb and Aurora exchanged a glance. This was the moment they'd prepared for, the question that would define how the public saw them. "Yes," Aurora said simply. "It has. Though I'll be the first to admit that's complicated and unexpected, and we're still figuring out what that means." "You're from very different worlds," Catherine observed. "How do you navigate that?" "By remembering that those different worlds don't define who we are as people," Caleb said. "Aurora might be a billionaire CEO, but she's also someone who makes pancakes for my daughter and listens to 7-year-old stories about dinosaurs. I might be a handyman living paycheck to paycheck, but that doesn't mean I have less to offer in a relationship. What you offer, Aurora added, turning to look at him directly, is honesty, integrity, the kind of genuine human connection I haven't experienced in years. That's worth more than any amount of money. Catherine leaned forward, and for the first time her professional demeanor cracked slightly. Ms. Lane, you've built a reputation as a tough, sometimes ruthless CEO. But this week you've shown a different side, fighting for community protection, creating initiatives to help working families. What changed? Aurora was quiet for a moment, considering. Nothing changed. This is who I've always been, but I kept it hidden because in the business world, caring about people is often seen as weakness. Caleb reminded me that it's actually strength, that the ability to see people as more than assets or obstacles, to care about their stories and struggles, that's not a liability. It's what makes us human. The interview continued for another hour, covering everything from the board meeting drama to their plans for the Rivers Initiative to how they envisioned their future together. Through it all, Caleb felt the weight of public scrutiny, the awareness that millions of people would watch this and form opinions about their lives, their choices, their worthiness of happiness. When it was finally over and Catherine and her crew had packed up and left, Caleb and Aurora stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights spreading to the horizon like a constellation fallen to Earth. "How do you think that went?" he asked. "Honestly, I think we did well. You were natural, authentic. That moment when you talked about what I offer," her voice caught slightly. "That was the most genuine thing I've heard in any interview ever." It was true. All of it. Aurora turned to face him, and in the dim light of the penthouse, she looked younger, more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Are you sure about this? About us? Because once that interview airs, there's no going back. Your life will never be private again. People will have opinions about every choice you make, every interaction we have. Maya will grow up with people knowing who she is because of her connection to me. Is that really what you want?" Caleb moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, okay? I didn't pull you from that car thinking about the consequences. I didn't let you stay in my house calculating the risks. I didn't stand beside you at that board meeting weighing the pros and cons. I did all of those things because they felt right, because you felt right. Caleb, I'm not done." He squeezed her hands gently. "Yes, this is complicated. Yes, there will be challenges and scrutiny and people who don't understand. But I've spent 3 years playing it safe, keeping my head down, not taking risks because I was terrified of making things worse. And you know what? I was miserable. Surviving isn't the same as living, Aurora. You taught me that." "You taught me the same thing," she whispered. "Then let's take the risk together. Let's build something real out of this impossible situation. Not because it's easy or safe or what people expect, but because we both deserve to be happy. Because Maya deserves to see that good things can come from kindness. Because sometimes the universe hands you exactly what you need, and you'd be a fool not to grab onto it with both hands." Aurora was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "When did you become such a romantic?" "About a week ago, when a woman crashed into my life and reminded me that I'm more than my struggles." She kissed him then, deep and fierce and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I have something for you," she said, pulling back slightly. "Wait here." She disappeared into another room and returned carrying an envelope. Inside were legal documents, and as Caleb read through them, his hand started shaking. "This is the deed to your house, signed over to you free and clear, and papers establishing a trust fund for Maya's education, separate from anything to do with us or our relationship. It's protected, untouchable, guaranteed to cover her college expenses regardless of what happens between you and me." Aurora watched his face carefully. "Before you protest, understand that this isn't about our relationship. This is me completing a transaction. You saved my life and my company. This is fair compensation, Caleb. Actually, it's probably not enough, but it's a start." "Aurora, I can't." "You can. You will." Her voice was firm. Because accepting help isn't weakness, and I need you to understand that just like you taught me that caring isn't weakness. We're both learning here, okay? Learning that it's okay to lean on people, to accept support, to believe that maybe we deserve good things. Caleb stared at the documents in his hands, at the words that meant security for his daughter, stability for the first time in 3 years. He thought about his pride, about his refusal to accept charity, about all the reasons he should push this away. Then he thought about Maya, about the field trips she'd miss and the opportunities she wouldn't have because he was too stubborn to accept help. He thought about Aurora's face when she'd said that accepting help wasn't weakness. He thought about building a life based on partnership instead of pride. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. Thank you." Aurora's smile was radiant. "Thank you for letting me do this. You have no idea how good it feels to use my resources for something that actually matters." They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, about their hopes and fears and what they wanted their future to look like. Aurora admitted her terror of losing herself in a relationship, of becoming just someone's girlfriend instead of her own person. Caleb confessed his guilt about moving on from Sarah, about whether he was betraying her memory by falling for someone else. "She'd want you to be happy," Aurora said gently. "From everything you've told me about her, Sarah sounds like someone who loved you and Maya too much to want you to be alone forever." "Logically, I know that, but the heart doesn't always follow logic." "No," Aurora agreed. "It really doesn't." As the night grew late, Caleb called Patricia to check on Maya and learned she was already asleep, content and safe. They decided to stay at the penthouse for the night rather than face the media circus that was probably still camped outside his house. Aurora gave him the guest room, and they said goodnight with a kiss that promised more, but respected the need to take things slow, to build something solid instead of rushing into intensity driven by crisis and emotion. Lying in a bed that probably cost more than every piece of furniture he owned combined, Caleb thought about how dramatically his life had changed. A week ago, he'd been invisible, just another struggling single parent that society had decided wasn't worth noticing. Now he was dating a billionaire CEO, about to become a homeowner, and had his daughter's entire future secured. It should have felt surreal, like a fairy tale that would evaporate in the harsh light of morning. Instead, it felt like coming home. Like all the struggles and pain and barely surviving had been leading him exactly here, to this moment, to this woman, to this chance at building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The next morning, they returned to his house to find the media presence had actually intensified. The interview had aired overnight and apparently struck a chord with viewers. People were calling them a modern fairy tale, praising their honesty, debating whether their relationship could survive the class differences and public scrutiny. "At least they're mostly positive," Aurora observed, scrolling through her phone as they sat in the car, still parked down the street to avoid the cameras. "Mostly?" Caleb leaned over to look at her screen. "What's the negative say?" "The usual. That I'm slumming, that you're using me, that we're both naive to think this can work." She shrugged, but he could see the words hurt. "There are also some lovely messages suggesting I'm betraying my class by dating a working-class man, as if there are literal rules about who I'm allowed to fall for." "Fall for?" Caleb caught the phrase, his heart beating faster. "Is that what this is? Falling?" Aurora looked at him directly, her gray-green eyes serious. "I think I started falling the moment you handed me that coffee in your kitchen and told me I looked like I needed it more than you did. What about you?" He thought about the past week, about every small moment that had added up to this overwhelming feeling in his chest. "I think I started falling when you insisted on making Maya breakfast despite being injured and exhausted, when you proved that money and power hadn't made you forget how to be human." They sat there in his ancient pickup truck, parked on a street in his working-class neighborhood, both of them grinning like idiots while reporters and cameras waited just up the road. "We're doing this," Aurora said, and it wasn't a question. "We're doing this," Caleb confirmed. They drove up to the house together, and this time, instead of hiding from the cameras, they walked hand in hand to the front door. Let them see, Caleb thought. Let them take their pictures and write their stories and form their opinions. At the end of the day, what mattered was that he and Aurora knew the truth about themselves and each other. Inside, Maya was home from school, doing homework at the kitchen table under Patricia's supervision. She looked up when they entered, and her face split into a huge smile. "Daddy, Miss Aurora, I saw you on TV. Everyone at school was talking about it." "Oh yeah?" Caleb knelt down beside her chair. "What were they saying?" "That you saved Miss Aurora's life and now you're boyfriend and girlfriend, and it's like a movie." Maya looked between them with a 7-year-old's blunt assessment. "Are you boyfriend and girlfriend?" Caleb glanced at Aurora, who was trying not to laugh. "Would that be okay with you if we were?" Maya considered this seriously. "Will Miss Aurora still make pancakes?" "Absolutely," Aurora said, settling into the chair beside Maya. "In fact, I was thinking we could make them together every Sunday, if that's okay with your dad." "That sounds perfect," Caleb said, his throat tight with emotion. "Then it's okay," Maya decided, returning to her homework as if she hadn't just given her blessing to a relationship that would change all their lives. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow even though it's not Sunday?" "Sure, baby. We can have pancakes whenever you want." That evening, after Maya was in bed and Patricia had gone home, Caleb and Aurora sat on the duct-taped couch and planned their future. Not in grand, sweeping terms, but in the small, practical details that actually mattered. Aurora would split her time between the city and his house, working remotely when she could. Caleb would continue his handyman business, but also take on a consulting role with the Rivers Initiative, using his perspective to help shape programs that actually served the communities they were trying to help. "I want to do this right," Aurora said, her head resting on his shoulder. "Not rush into living together or making grand gestures, but actually build something sustainable. Get to know each other without the crisis and drama pushing us together." "Agreed. Though I have to say, the crisis and drama made for one hell of an introduction." She laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "That it did. But I want our relationship to be about more than just the dramatic beginning. I want boring Sunday mornings and stupid arguments about whose turn it is to do dishes and all the mundane, beautiful things that make a life together." "Boring sounds perfect," Caleb said, kissing the top of her head. "Though knowing us, boring will probably include the occasional media circus and corporate drama." "Probably," she admitted, "but we'll face it together." Together. The words settled over them like a promise, like hope made tangible. Outside, the reporters were finally packing up, the story moving on to the next crisis, the next scandal. But inside this small house, with its peeling wallpaper and crooked cabinets, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances were building something that might just last. 6 months passed like water flowing around stones, reshaping the landscape of their lives in ways both subtle and profound. The media frenzy eventually died down to occasional flare-ups when Aurora made a major business decision, or when someone spotted them together at Maya's school events. They learned to navigate the attention, to protect their private moments while accepting that some level of public interest was simply the price of Aurora's position and their unconventional love story. The house, Caleb's house, legally now, though he still sometimes forgot that it was truly his, underwent gradual transformation. Not the kind of renovation that would have erased its character, but thoughtful improvements that made it more livable. Aurora insisted on fixing the crooked cabinet, replacing the ancient water heater that had been on its last legs, updating the electrical system that made Caleb nervous every time Maya plugged something in. He'd fought her on each improvement until she pointed out that accepting help wasn't the same as losing independence. That partnership meant letting someone care about your comfort and safety. "Besides," she'd said with that small smile that still made his heart skip, "I spend half my time here now. Consider it a selfish investment in my own comfort." Maya thrived in ways that made Caleb's chest ache with gratitude. The financial security meant she could join the soccer team she'd been begging to play on, could go on field trips without him having to choose between her experiences and keeping the lights on. But more than the material changes, it was the emotional transformation that struck him most. His daughter had someone else to talk to learn from, to love. Aurora attended Maya's games and school performances, helped with homework, listened to endless stories about playground drama with the same attention she gave to billion-dollar business decisions. On a Saturday morning in late spring, Caleb woke to find Aurora already gone from beside him. She'd started staying in his room a few months ago after Maya had asked point-blank why Miss Aurora slept in the guest room when she was clearly Daddy's girlfriend and girlfriends were supposed to share rooms. The logic of 7-year-olds was difficult to argue with. He found her in the kitchen with Maya, both of them flour-dusted and giggling over what appeared to be an attempt at homemade cinnamon rolls. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly normal, that for a moment he just stood in the doorway watching them, memorizing this moment of simple happiness. "Daddy," Maya spotted him. "We're making surprise breakfast, but you woke up too early and ruined the surprise." "My apologies," he said solemnly, moving into the kitchen to kiss the top of Maya's head, then Aurora's lips. "Should I go back to bed and pretend to be surprised later?" "Too late now," Aurora said, her eyes warm as she looked at him. "You'll just have to act amazed when these actually turn out edible." "I have complete faith in both of you." He poured himself coffee and settled at the table, content to watch them work. This was the life they'd built together over the past months. Not grand gestures or fairy tale moments, but quiet mornings and shared responsibilities and the steady accumulation of memories that made a family. The Rivers Initiative had launched 3 months ago to national attention and overwhelming response. What had started as Aurora's impulse to honor Caleb's kindness had evolved into a comprehensive program supporting single parents across the country. They provided emergency financial assistance, job training, childcare resources, and most importantly, treated recipients with dignity instead of judgment. Caleb had taken on a larger role than either of them initially planned, becoming the public face of the program alongside Aurora, sharing his story to help other parents feel less alone in their struggles. "I got an email this morning," Aurora said as she slid the cinnamon rolls into the oven, "from a woman in Ohio, single mother of 3, working 2 jobs, about to lose her apartment. The initiative got her caught up on rent and connected her with job training for a position that pays twice what she was making. She said," Aurora's voice caught slightly, "she said we saved her life without ever meeting her." Caleb stood and pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake slightly with emotion. This was the side of Aurora the public rarely saw, the woman who read every letter, who cried over success stories, who lost sleep worrying about the people they couldn't help, the billionaire CEO who'd never forgotten what it felt like to be powerless. "You did save her," he said quietly. "You're saving hundreds of people, thousands probably, by the time this really gets going." "We're saving them," she corrected, pulling back to look at him. "This only works because you helped me understand what people actually need. Not charity that makes them feel small, but support that respects their dignity." "Are you guys going to be mushy all morning?" Maya asked from the table where she was now drawing on construction paper. "Because it's kind of gross." They both laughed, the moment broken but not lost. These were the pieces their life was built from. Big emotions and small interruptions, world-changing work and burnt cinnamon rolls, love expressed in quiet moments, and silly complaints from a child who was learning what healthy relationships looked like. Later that afternoon, after the cinnamon rolls had been devoured despite being slightly underdone in the middle, Aurora received a call that made her face go pale. She stepped out onto the back porch to take it, and through the window Caleb could see her pacing, one hand pressed to her forehead in the gesture he'd learned meant she was stressed or worried or both. When she came back inside, her expression was carefully neutral in that way that meant she was working hard to hold herself together. "That was Marcus," she said quietly. "There's a situation at one of our properties downtown, the building I've been fighting to preserve instead of selling to developers. There was a fire last night in one of the units. No one was hurt, but the building inspector went through this morning and found code violations. Serious ones. The whole building needs to be evacuated until repairs can be made." "How many families?" Caleb asked, already knowing this was going to be bad. 42 units. Most of them occupied by people who can barely afford the rent as it is. "If I evacuate them, where do they go? The shelters are full, temporary housing is expensive, and even if I cover those costs, we're talking about displacing them for months while repairs are made." She sank into a chair, her usual composure cracking. "And the developers are going to use this. They'll say I'm a negligent landlord, that I let the building deteriorate, that this proves I can't handle property management. They'll push harder for me to sell, and the board is going to lose their minds." Maya, sensing the adult conversation was serious, had taken herself to her room to play. Caleb sat down across from Aurora and took her hands. "Okay," he said calmly. "Let's think through this. First question, what caused the fire? Faulty wiring in one of the older units. The building is from the 70s, and despite regular maintenance, some of the original electrical work is just past its safe lifespan. So not neglect, age and infrastructure issues that affect thousands of older buildings across the country. That's not how the media will spin it. Probably not, Caleb agreed. But here's what I know about you after 6 months. You don't make decisions based on how they'll be perceived. You make them based on what's right. So what's right here? Aurora was quiet for a long moment, thinking. What's right is making sure those families are safe and taken care of, finding them temporary housing, covering their expenses, making the repairs as quickly as possible, and probably renovating the entire building to prevent this from happening again. And how much will that cost? Millions. Probably tens of millions by the time it's all done. She looked at him, and he could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The board will fight me on this. They'll say it's throwing good money after bad, that we should just sell the building and let it become someone else's problem. But that's not what you're going to do. No. Her voice was firm now, decided. Those families trusted me to provide safe housing. I'm not going to abandon them just because it's expensive or politically difficult. Then let's figure out how to make it work. What followed were 3 intense days of planning and execution that reminded Caleb why Aurora Lane was a billionaire CEO. She moved with precision and determination, coordinating temporary housing for all 42 families, arranging moving services, covering deposits and rent for however long repairs took. She hired the best contractors money could buy and had them working around the clock to assess and plan the renovation. She personally called each tenant to explain the situation and assure them they weren't being displaced permanently. Caleb watched her work and fell a little more in love with every phone call, every decision that prioritized people over profits. When she finally collapsed on his couch at midnight on the 3rd day, exhausted and running on coffee and sheer determination, he brought her tea and sat beside her. The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow, she said, her voice hoarse from hours of phone calls. Davidson is back, apparently, recovered from his last attempt to overthrow me and ready to try again. He's going to argue that this situation proves I'm financially reckless, that I'm letting emotional decisions bankrupt the company. Are you? She laughed without humor. Financially, selling that building makes more sense. The developers are offering twice what it's worth, and the renovation will eat up most of that profit anyway. But it's not about the money. It's about the precedent. If I sell that building, every other property I own becomes a target. Every family living in Lane Industries housing will wonder if they're next. I can't let that happen. So don't. It might cost me the company this time, Aurora said quietly. Davidson has been building alliances, convincing board members that I'm a liability. If he gets enough votes tomorrow, then we'll deal with it. Caleb shifted so she was leaning against him, her head on his shoulder. But I've seen you face down a hostile board before. You won then. You'll win now. I had surprise and evidence of corruption on my side then. Now I just have expensive principals and a balance sheet that's going to look terrible for the next quarter. You also have something else you didn't have last time. What's that? Me. He kissed the top of her head. And Maya. And an entire community of people whose lives you've changed. The families in that building, the single parents the initiative has helped, the employees who respect you because you treat them like humans instead of resources. You're not alone in this fight anymore, Aurora. That has to count for something. She tilted her head to look up at him, and in her eyes he saw exhaustion and fear, but also hope. Will you come with me tomorrow? To the meeting? Do you even have to ask? The boardroom looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago, but everything else had changed. Caleb walked in beside Aurora with his head high, no longer intimidated by the wealth and power concentrated in this space. He'd learned that money didn't make people better, or smarter, or more worthy of respect. It just made them richer. Davidson was already seated at the far end of the table, looking smug and confident. Several board members Caleb recognized from the last meeting were clustered around him, clearly part of his coalition. But there were others scattered around the table who watched Aurora enter with expressions ranging from curious to supportive. Aurora, Davidson said, his voice dripping with false concern. Thank you for joining us. I know this week has been difficult with the situation at the Riverside building. Cut the pleasantries, Davidson. Aurora took her seat at the head of the table, and Caleb stood slightly behind her, a silent show of support. You called this meeting to challenge my handling of the fire and subsequent evacuation. So, let's get to it. Davidson smiled, and it reminded Caleb of a snake. Very well. The board has concerns about your decision to evacuate an entire building and fund temporary housing for all residents at company expense. While we appreciate your, he paused delicately, humanitarian instincts, the fact is this decision will cost the company approximately $15 million in the short term, with renovation costs potentially reaching $30 million. Those figures are accurate, Aurora confirmed. And you made this decision unilaterally, without board approval or consultation. I made it within my authority as CEO to handle emergency situations that require immediate action. The building had serious code violations. Leaving people in unsafe housing while we debated the financial implications would have been negligent and potentially criminal. But the long-term financial impact is manageable and justified, Aurora interrupted, pulling up a presentation on the screen behind her. Let me show you what $30 million in renovation actually buys us. A fully modernized building that will serve families safely for the next 50 years. Updated electrical, plumbing, HVAC systems that will reduce maintenance costs by 40%. Energy-efficient improvements that will lower utility costs for residents and reduce our carbon footprint. And most importantly, loyalty and goodwill that money can't buy. She clicked to the next slide, which showed testimonials from residents of the Riverside building, photos of families, children, elderly couples who'd lived there for decades. These are our tenants, Aurora continued. Real people whose lives depend on our decisions. When news broke about the evacuation, do you know what happened? 300 current and former residents showed up to volunteer. They helped their neighbors move, offered spare rooms, donated furniture and supplies. The local news covered it as a story about community resilience. Lane Industries has received more positive press in the past week than we've had in years. That's lovely. Moreau, who'd apparently also survived her last attempt at overthrowing Aurora, said acidly. But sentiment doesn't pay dividends. Actually, it does. Aurora clicked to another slide showing market analysis. Our stock price has increased 12% since the fire, specifically because investors appreciate companies with strong values and community engagement. ESG investing is the fastest growing sector in finance, and we're positioned perfectly to capitalize on that trend. This renovation isn't a liability. It's an investment in our brand and our future. Caleb watched the board members' faces as Aurora systematically dismantled every argument against her decision. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, brilliant and passionate, using her power not to crush people but to protect them, proving that doing the right thing and doing good business weren't mutually exclusive. Furthermore, Aurora continued, her voice gaining strength, I've secured agreements with 3 major foundations to partially fund the renovation through grants for sustainable housing initiatives. The actual cost to the company will be closer to $18 million, not $30, and I've negotiated with the contractors to hire residents of the building for much of the renovation work, providing jobs and skills training while keeping costs down. You've been busy, Davidson said, but his confidence was clearly shaken. I have, because unlike you, I see challenges as opportunities to prove our values, not excuses to abandon them. Aurora leaned forward, her eyes hard. Now, let's talk about what you're really angry about. The Morrison development deal that you and your associates stood to profit from. The one I refused to approve 6 months ago. That's relevant, because this isn't about the Riverside building at all, is it? This is about you being furious that I won't let you turn this company into a machine for extracting wealth from vulnerable communities. You want me gone so you can approve deals that benefit you personally while harming the people we're supposed to serve. Davidson's face went red. That's a baseless accusation. Is it? Aurora clicked to another slide, and Caleb recognized the same documents she'd used 6 months ago, updated with new information. These are communications between you and Morrison Development from the past month. Emails discussing how my removal would clear the path for renewed negotiations. Text messages about your promised consulting fees once the deal goes through. I'd call that pretty solid evidence of your motivations. The room erupted in angry voices. Board members demanding explanations, Davidson shouting denials, Moreau frantically typing on her phone. Through it all, Aurora sat calmly, letting the chaos unfold around her. Finally, Chen, the older board member who'd supported Aurora last time, stood up, and her voice cut through the noise. "Enough! I've heard enough!" She looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. "I've served on this board for 20 years since Aurora's parents first took the company public. I've watched Aurora build this company into something that actually matters, that actually helps people. And I've watched certain members of this board try repeatedly to undermine her because she won't compromise her values for short-term profits." She turned to face Davidson directly. "I move that we not only reject this attempt to question Aurora's leadership, but that we also open an investigation into your communications with Morrison Development and any other potential conflicts of interest. And I further move that board members found to have violated their fiduciary duty be removed and potentially face legal action." "I second that motion," another board member said immediately, then other. The vote wasn't even close. Davidson and Moreau were outvoted by a margin that made it clear just how isolated their position had become. As they gathered their things to leave, Davidson paused beside Aurora's chair. "This isn't over," he said quietly, but there was defeat in his voice. "Yes," Aurora replied calmly. "It is. You're done, Davidson, and frankly, it's long overdue." After the board meeting concluded and the room had cleared except for a few members who stayed to congratulate Aurora, Caleb watched her deflate slightly, the armor of the CEO sliding away to reveal the exhausted woman underneath. "Come on," he said gently, taking her hand. "Let's go home." On the drive back, in Caleb's truck this time, because Aurora had admitted she found something comforting about the rattling engine and cracked seats, they were mostly quiet, both processing the intensity of the past few days. "I keep thinking about something you said," Aurora finally spoke as they neared his neighborhood, "about how I'm not alone anymore, that I have people fighting alongside me. It's true. I've spent so long believing that success meant being self-sufficient, not needing anyone, having all the answers." She looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "But that's not strength. That's just isolation disguised as independence." "Took me a while to learn that too," Caleb admitted. "Spent 3 years after Sarah died refusing help, convinced that accepting support meant I was failing as a father. Turned out I was failing Maya more by trying to do everything alone." "How did you finally accept it? The help? The support?" He thought about that morning 6 months ago when he'd woken to find Aurora in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, offering him coffee, and changing his life. "I met someone who made me realize that letting people care about you isn't weakness. It's trust. And trust is maybe the strongest thing there is." Aurora was quiet for a moment, then said something that made his heart stop. "I love you, Caleb Rivers. I'm in love with you. Completely, terrifyingly in love with you." He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, not caring that they were 2 blocks from home, needing to look at her properly for this moment. "Aurora Lane, I have been in love with you since the morning you taught my daughter to flip pancakes and made her laugh like Sarah used to. Maybe even before that. Maybe since the moment you looked at me in that boardroom and asked me to believe in you." They kissed there in his ancient pickup truck, parked on a suburban street while the sun set behind them. And it felt like every kiss and every love story, but also completely unique, completely theirs. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "So what do we do now?" Aurora asked. "Now we go home to Maya and tell her she's going to have to put up with us being even more mushy than usual. She's going to hate that. Probably, but she'll get over it." They did exactly that, walking into the house hand in hand to find Maya in the living room with Patricia, both of them working on a puzzle. Maya looked up and immediately wrinkled her nose. "You guys look all weird and sappy. Did something happen?" "We told each other we love each other," Caleb said, because he'd learned from his daughter that sometimes directness was the best approach. Maya considered this seriously. "Were you supposed to say that before or after you became boyfriend and girlfriend? I can't remember from the movies." "Usually before," Aurora said, trying not to laugh. "But we did things a little backward." "That's okay. You guys do everything backward." Maya returned to her puzzle as if they hadn't just declared life-changing emotions. Can we still have tacos for dinner like you promised? Absolutely, Caleb said, sharing an amused look with Aurora over his daughter's head. Tacos and uncomfortable mushiness. The perfect evening. Months continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and triumphs. The Riverside building renovation was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, and every single tenant moved back in with the added bonus of modernized apartments they could still afford. The story became a case study in ethical business practices, and Aurora was invited to speak at conferences about sustainable community development. The Rivers Initiative expanded to 12 states, helping thousands of single parents stabilize their lives and plan for better futures. Caleb found himself traveling with Aurora sometimes, sharing his story at events, helping shape programs, learning that his experiences had value beyond just surviving them. Maya turned 8 and declared she wanted to be an engineer like her daddy used to be and a CEO like Miss Aurora because she didn't see why she had to choose. She thrived in school, made friends easily, and occasionally complained about how embarrassing it was that her dad's girlfriend was famous. But it was clear she loved Aurora fiercely and completely. On a Saturday morning in early fall, almost exactly a year after the storm that had changed everything, Caleb woke to find Aurora already awake beside him, propped up on one elbow and watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "This is creepy," he mumbled, still half asleep. "Watching people sleep is creepy." "I was thinking," she said, ignoring his complaint. "Dangerous. About how much my life has changed in the past year, about how I used to live in that sterile penthouse and go days without having a real conversation with anyone, about how I measured success in dollars and stock prices and never thought about what I was actually building." Caleb was more awake now, sensing this was important. "And what do you think about it now?" "That I was living a half-life, going through the motions of existence but not actually experiencing anything real. Then a storm came and a stranger pulled me from a burning car and showed me what it means to actually live." She traced her finger along his jaw. "You saved my life twice, Caleb. Once from the fire and once from the emptiness. Aurora, I'm not done." She took a breath, and he noticed for the first time that her hand was shaking slightly. "I've been thinking about what I want my future to look like, and I realize that every version of it I can imagine has you and Maya in it, permanently, not just girlfriend visiting boyfriend, but family, real, messy, complicated family." His heart was pounding now. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying—" She reached into the nightstand and pulled out a small box, and Caleb's breath caught in his throat. "I'm saying that I want to marry you. I want to adopt Maya if you'll let me. I want to make this thing we've built official and permanent and real. I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life in this house, with its fixed but still slightly crooked cabinets, and know that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She opened the box to reveal a simple gold band, elegant in its lack of pretension. "It's titanium," she explained. "I remembered you saying that titanium is what you used for your toughest repairs because it's strong and doesn't break under pressure. Like us. Like what we've built together." Caleb was crying now, not even trying to hide it. "You're proposing to me." "I am. And before you protest that you're supposed to be the one doing the proposing because of gender roles or tradition or whatever, let me remind you that we've never done anything the traditional way, and I'm not starting now." He laughed through his tears, taking the box from her hands and looking at the ring that symbolized everything they'd become to each other. "Aurora Lane, you are the most incredible, frustrating, brilliant, stubborn woman I've ever met. You came into my life during the worst storm I'd seen in years, and somehow became the best thing that ever happened to me after Maya. So yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want Maya to have you as a mother. Yes to all of it." She kissed him then, and they were both crying and laughing, the ring box falling forgotten onto the bed as they held each other and let the weight of this promise settle over them. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real and earned and built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine love. "Can I put it on you?" Aurora asked when they finally pulled apart, both of them grinning like fools. "Absolutely." She slid the ring onto his finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for him, which it probably had been, knowing Aurora's attention to detail. "We should tell Maya," Caleb said. "Should we? Or should we wait until a better time? A knock on the door interrupted her, and Maya's voice called out, "Are you guys done being mushy? Patricia wants to know if you want breakfast." They looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Come in, baby," Caleb called. Maya entered, still in her pajamas, and immediately zeroed in on Caleb's hand. "What's that ring? Did you get married without telling me?" "Not yet," Aurora said, "but I asked your dad to marry me, and he said yes. How do you feel about that?" Maya was quiet for a long moment, her face serious as she processed this information. Then she launched herself onto the bed between them, wrapping her arms around both of them at once. "Does this mean Miss Aurora will be my mom?" she asked into the tangle of their embrace. "If you want me to be," Aurora said carefully. "I know I can never replace your mom, and I'm not trying to. But I love you very much, and I'd be honored to be your parent alongside your dad." Maya pulled back to look at Aurora directly. "My mom died when I was little, so I don't remember her much. But Daddy talks about her sometimes, and she sounds like she was really nice. I think she'd like you. I think she'd be happy that you make Daddy smile again." Now all three of them were crying, holding each other in a messy pile of emotions and love and the beautiful complexity of blended families built from loss and hope. "So yes," Maya said firmly, "you can be my mom, but I still get to call you Miss Aurora sometimes because I like how it sounds." "Deal," Aurora managed through her tears. Patricia appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, and smiled knowingly. "I'll make extra pancakes," she said, and quietly closed the door. The wedding happened 3 months later in early winter, small and intimate in the backyard of the house that had become the foundation of their family. They debated having a big ceremony. Aurora's position meant they could have invited hundreds of people, had it covered by magazines, made it an event. But in the end, they decided that this moment was theirs, not the world's. The guest list was limited to the people who actually mattered. Maya, of course, standing between them as they exchanged vows, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself and looking impossibly grown up. Patricia, who'd become more family than employee over the past year. Marcus and a few other colleagues from Lane Industries who'd proven themselves genuine friends. Mrs. Chen from next door, who'd supported Caleb through the hardest years of his life. A handful of residents from the Riverside building, representing the community that had brought them together. And Chen, the board member who'd stood by Aurora through every challenge, serving as witness to the promises they made. They wrote their own vows, and when it was Caleb's turn to speak, he looked at Aurora standing across from him in a simple white dress, no designer label or couture, just elegant and perfect and his. "Aurora, a year ago I was a man who'd forgotten how to hope, who'd convinced himself that survival was the same as living, that keeping my head above water was the best I could expect from life. Then you crashed into my world, literally, and reminded me that kindness matters, that people can change, that love can grow in the most unlikely circumstances." He squeezed her hands. "You saw me when I felt invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I'd forgotten I was worthy of love. And you've given Maya something I couldn't give her alone, a complete family, with 2 parents who love her fiercely and will never stop fighting for her future." He had to pause, emotion overwhelming him. Maya reached up and squeezed his arm encouragingly. "I promise to stand beside you in every battle, to believe in you when you doubt yourself, to remind you that you're more than your success or your company or your wealth. I promise to be your partner in building a life that matters, to support your dreams while pursuing my own, to love you on the hard days as much as the easy ones. I promise to be worthy of the trust you placed in me that morning when you stood in my kitchen and asked me to fight alongside you." Aurora was crying openly now, not caring who saw, and when it was her turn to speak, her voice shook but didn't break. "Caleb, you saved my life. But more than that, you gave me a reason to value that life beyond money or power or corporate achievement. You taught me that strength comes from vulnerability, that leadership means service, that success without humanity is just an expensive form of failure." She smiled through her tears. "You and Maya took a woman who'd forgotten how to be anything except a CEO and reminded her that she could also be a partner, a parent, a person. You gave me a home, not just a house, but a place where I belong, where I'm loved for who I am instead of what I can provide." She looked down at Maya, including her in the vows. "I promise to honor the memory of the mother Maya lost while trying to be the mother she needs now. I promise to build a family with you based on respect and partnership and the understanding that we're stronger together than apart. I promise to use my resources and influence to make the world better for people like you were a year ago, struggling, overlooked, deserving of so much more than they were given. Looking back at Caleb, she finished, I promise to love you and Maya with everything I have, in the boring moments and the dramatic ones, in poverty and in wealth, though hopefully more the latter because the poverty thing looks really difficult. I promise to be your partner in every sense of the word for as long as we both shall live. The officiant pronounced them married, and when Caleb kissed his wife, Maya cheered and the small crowd applauded, and somewhere in the universe, he liked to think Sarah was smiling, happy that her daughter would grow up loved and her husband had found joy again. The reception was held in the house, spilling out into the backyard where they'd set up tables and lights. Aurora had insisted on catering from the local diner instead of some fancy service, and they served comfort food and pie and the best coffee in town. People mingled and laughed, and for a few hours the CEO and the handyman were just a couple celebrating their marriage with the people they loved. Later, after most of the guests had left and Maya had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in Patricia's arms, Caleb and Aurora stood in the backyard looking up at the stars. The night was clear and cold, their breath visible in the air, and they stood close together for warmth. We did it, Aurora said softly. Built something real out of chaos. We did, Caleb agreed. Though I'm pretty sure this is just the beginning. Marriage is supposed to be when things get complicated. More complicated than pulling me from a burning car and then fighting off a corporate coup? Fair point. Maybe we've already handled the complicated part. She laughed, the sound carrying in the quiet night. I love you, Caleb Rivers, my husband. Even the word sounds strange and wonderful. I love you too, Aurora Rivers. He grinned at her surprised expression. What? You thought I'd let you keep being Aurora Lane? You asked me to marry you and you're wearing my ring. I get to claim you as a Rivers too. Aurora Lane Rivers, she said, testing out the name. I like it. Keeps my professional identity while claiming my personal one. Hyphenate away. As long as you're mine, I don't care what you call yourself. They stood there until the cold drove them inside, where they found Maya had woken up just enough to demand they all sleep in one bed because families should be together. So they did. All three of them piled into the master bedroom, Maya between them, and fell asleep as a family for the first time officially, though it had felt true for months already. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Aurora faced more boardroom battles, though none as dramatic as those first attempts to remove her. The Rivers Initiative grew beyond anything they'd initially imagined, eventually operating in all 50 states and helping tens of thousands of families. Caleb finished his engineering degree, working online while still running his handyman business, eventually joining Lane Industries in a role developing sustainable housing solutions. Maya grew up loved and secure, never doubting that she mattered or that both her parents would move mountains for her. She knew the story of how they met, the storm and the fire and the kiss in the living room, and she told anyone who would listen that her family was basically a movie come to life. On the 5-year anniversary of the night Aurora crashed into their lives, Caleb and Aurora stood in that same backyard, watching Maya, now 12 and already taller than Aurora, kick a soccer ball around with friends from school. The house had been expanded slightly, given a second bathroom and a proper home office for Aurora, but they'd kept its essential character. This was still the place where they'd built their family, where impossible things had become real. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked, pulling Aurora close. The life you gave up? The penthouse? The prestige? The image of the untouchable billionaire CEO? Never, Aurora said, without hesitation. I gave up an illusion for reality, a performance for genuine life. I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. Even when Maya's being a difficult preteen and I'm grumpy because I stayed up too late working on a project? Especially then. Because even the hard parts are real. Even the boring, frustrating, ordinary moments matter because they're ours. We built this together, Caleb. From nothing, from wreckage, we built something that's going to last. She was right, he thought, watching his daughter laugh with her friends while his wife, his brilliant, complicated, wonderful wife, leaned against his shoulder. They'd taken the worst night either of them could have imagined and turned it into the beginning of the best life they could have hoped for. Sometimes kindness saves a life. Sometimes it builds a family. Sometimes it starts with a stranger in a storm, a burning car, and a decision to help without expecting anything in return. But it always, always matters. Every small act of decency, every moment of seeing someone else's humanity, every choice to care when it would be easier not to, they all ripple outward in ways you can't predict or control. Caleb had pulled a dying woman from a wreck not knowing she was a billionaire, not knowing she would fall in love with him, not knowing she would become his daughter's mother and his partner in every sense of the word. He'd just seen someone who needed help and helped them. And somehow, impossibly, that simple act had changed everything. As the sun set over their backyard and Maya's laughter rang out, and Aurora smiled against his shoulder, Caleb thought about all the small choices that had led them here. His decision to drive through the storm, Aurora's refusal to compromise her values, their mutual willingness to trust when trust seemed impossible, Maya's open heart that had room for a new mother without forgetting the first. This was the life they'd built together, imperfect, complicated, absolutely real. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A genuine partnership between two people who'd learned that strength and vulnerability weren't opposites, that power meant nothing without purpose, that love could grow from the strangest beginnings and become the foundation for everything that mattered. And it had all started with a storm, a fire, and a man who'd simply refused to let death win. "Not today," he'd said. "You don't get to die today." He'd been talking to Aurora then, but in saving her, he'd also saved himself. They'd saved each other, really. And that, Caleb thought as he held his wife close while their daughter played in the twilight, was the truest kind of love story there was.